Chapter 47. In the Heavenly Secret Commerce Alliance, Lu Quan politely sent Lu Yi to the door. Most of the cultivators in the outer circle were relatively poor, unless they were disciples from large sects. Therefore, it was not easy to come across a transaction worth a few dozen spirit stones, and Lu Ye's personality was quite straightforward, so Lu Quan naturally wanted to get to know him better so that he could take care of business in the future. After watching Lu Ye's figure disappear, Lu Quan turned around and a fragrant wind hit him in the face. Someone was standing behind him. "You scared me." Lu Quan grumbled, "Why are you standing behind me instead of greeting the guests?" The woman said sweetly, "I missed you." Lu Quan glanced around with a guilty conscience and found that no one was paying attention to them, so he lowered his voice and said, "I'll find you tonight when I get off work." "Okay." The woman replied with a smile. Lu Quan walked to the hall and greeted the other guests as if nothing had happened, while the woman glanced in the direction Lu Yi left, a thoughtful look in her eyes. When it was night time, the two of them chatted casually. The topic of conversation was intentionally or unintentionally led by the woman to the transaction during the day. Lu Quan was a little sleepy, so he responded intermittently. Not long after, he fell into a deep sleep. The woman lay in his arms, but found it difficult to fall asleep. If she was not mistaken, the guest during the day was the one she served half a month ago. He sold a lot of ores and bought some spirit pills before leaving. She never thought that in just half a month, he would come to sell ores again. Looking at the appearance of the guest, he should be a loose cultivator without a doubt. A loose cultivator who had no one to rely on could gather a few dozen spirit stones in such a short time, so it was natural that people would pay attention to him. Working in the Heavenly Secret Commerce Alliance like this, including the extra income, she could only get 12 or 13 spirit stones a month at most. This reminded her of her days as a loose cultivator, and when she compared them, she couldn't help feeling a little bitter. After thinking about it for a long time, she felt sleepy, but she couldn't sleep well. At the same time, in the cave of Azure Cloud Mountain, Lu Yi was cultivating. During the day, after he finished the transaction at the Heavenly Secret Commerce Alliance, he bought a lot of food with the remaining spirit stones and rushed back without stopping, finally arriving before nightfall. With enough spirit pills, he immediately began to take them and cultivate. As the spiritual pills were consumed one by one, the spiritual energy in the 15th orifice was gradually filled up, and it continued to rush towards the 16th orifice. 12 days later, Lu Yi sat cross-legged in the cave, meditating. Today was a big day. If everything went smoothly, he would be able to break through to the second-order spirit stream realm today. Since returning 12 days ago, he had consumed more than 30 yun spirit pills and finally opened the 18th aperture. Moreover, the spiritual power of the 18th aperture had been fully cultivated. Recalling the circulation route in the Golden Cicada Carefree technique, Lu Yi urged his spiritual energy to start from the 10th acupoint, then the 11th, the 12th, and finally the 18th. When he broke through to the first-order spirit stream realm, Yang Kai had done this before, so at this moment, he was quite familiar with the process and didn't encounter any difficulties. The spiritual energy smoothly passed through the 9 spiritual cavities, slowly flowing like a stream. Following Lu Ye's actions, the spiritual energy in the 9 spiritual cavities flowed faster and faster, circulating back and forth. When he reached his limit, Lu Yi felt his whole body shake. Waves of air swept out, and the spiritual energy flowing through his 10 to 18 apertures began to circulate on its own. Second-order spirit stream realm, success. Having had such an experience before, Lu Yi wasn't too happy about it. Instead, he was indifferent to it. The current him was no longer the little 3 apertures cultivator who had wandered into the spirit stream battlefield more than 2 months ago. If reaching the first-order spirit stream realm gave him the qualifications to survive in the outer ring of the battlefield, then reaching the second order gave him the qualifications to walk freely. Of course, there was still a gap between him and those cultivators with higher cultivation, but Lu Yi was already very satisfied. Compared to reaching the first-order spirit stream realm, the time it took him to reach the second-order spirit stream realm was much shorter. From the third aperture realm to the spirit stream realm, it took him about 40 days, but from the first order to the second order, it took him less than a month. The main reason was that he had sufficient cultivation resources, but even so, this cultivation speed was extremely terrifying. One had to know that in the early stages of cultivation, cultivators would need about 10 days to open a new aperture. This was because their main cultivation method was to breathe in and out world energy. If their cultivation wasn't high enough, the efficiency of breathing in and out world energy wasn't high, so their cultivation speed naturally wouldn't be fast. This situation would only improve slightly after reaching the fourth order spirit stream realm. In other words, in the early stages of cultivation, it was normal for an ordinary cultivator to break through one layer in 3 months, but for Lu Yi, he could break through one layer in a month on average. This was the joy of cultivation. When he was in the first order, Lu Ye's body only had a single minor spirit cycle from the source aperture to the 9th aperture, but after reaching the second order, there was an additional cycle from the 10th aperture to the 18th aperture. Now, he had 2 minor spirit cycle systems in his body. As a result, he could stimulate more spirit energy in a short period of time, and the destructive power of his spirit energy would naturally be stronger. At the third order, there would be 3 minor spirit cycles, and so on. A 9th order spirit stream realm cultivator would have 9 minor spirit cycle systems in their body. There were still 30 spirit accumulation pills left. Although Lu Yi wanted to continue cultivating, he also knew that haste made waste. He first ate something, then walked out of the cave and found a mountain spring to take a bath. After changing into a clean set of clothes, he took out the golden cicada carefree secret art and began studying it. Next, he wanted to advance to the third order spirit stream realm. He needed to figure out the location of the spirit apertures after the 18th aperture so that it would be convenient for him to continue cultivating. The mountains were quiet, and the occasional sound of birds chirping and insects flying could be heard. The mottled sunlight penetrated the barrier of leaves and shone on the side of the young man's face, making this scene seem like a scene from a painting. "What are you doing sneaking around?" Lu Yi shouted without raising his head. On the trunk of a big tree to the side, a small head poked out. If an uninformed person saw her appearance, they would definitely be frightened. Yi looked at the reading material in Lu Ye's hand, and after seeing that it was a low-level secret art, she curled her lips in disdain. "What's the matter?" Lu Yi resisted the urge to punch her, tilting his head and asking. "When are you leaving?" Yi asked. Although Lu Yi hadn't come out to hunt during this time, this was her and De Hu's territory. How could they allow others to snore next to their beds? If it weren't for her fear of the spirit talisman in Lu Ye's hands, she would have cooperated with De Hu to drive Lu Yi away. However, after suffering a loss at Lu Ye's hands, Yi didn't dare to act rashly. What's more, Yi could see that Lu Yi was much stronger than 2 months ago. Lu Yi closed the book, stood up and stretched. "I'm tired, I'm going back to sleep." "Hey, I'm asking you a question," Yi said angrily, but she didn't get a response. She could only grit her teeth and curse, "Scoundrel, stinky thing, you're really pissing me off, wah-ya-ya-ya." She scratched the big tree next to her, splinters flying. Chapter 48. After a day of recuperation, Lu Yi felt that the exhaustion from days of continuous cultivation had been swept away. It was time to advance to the third order spirit stream realm. He didn't rush to take a spirit pill, but first urged his spirit energy to locate the position of the 19th aperture. Now that he was in the second order spirit stream realm, his spirit energy was much stronger than 2 months ago, so locating the position of the spirit aperture was much easier. In less than an incense stick's worth of time, he found the location of the 19th aperture. Only then did he take out a profound spirit pill and consume it. He refined the pill's energy and guided his spirit energy towards the barrier of the 19th aperture. 3 days later, after consuming nearly 11 profound spirit pills, the 19th aperture was filled. This result was expected. Before reaching the spirit stream realm, his rate of opening apertures was about 1 aperture every 3 days, which required him to consume 6 spirit pills. After reaching the first-order spirit stream realm, the rate of opening apertures didn't change much, but the number of spirit pills required for each aperture increased, about 8 or 9. Now that he was in the second-order spirit stream realm, the consumption increased again, reaching 11 spirit pills, but the rate of opening apertures didn't change much. The main reason was that the higher his cultivation, the higher the efficiency of refining spirit pills. It seemed that the higher his cultivation, the more spirit pills he would need to open apertures in the future. Right now, he only had 20 spirit pills left, so he should be able to open 2 more apertures. Lu Yi silently calculated. According to the rate of opening apertures every 3 days, it would take him a full 1080 days to open 360 apertures. This result made him secretly speechless. He didn't know how other cultivators cultivated, but his cultivation speed shouldn't be slow. Even so, if he wanted to cultivate to the 9th-order spirit stream realm, it would still take him nearly 3 years. In the next few days, Lu Yi didn't leave the cave until the last spirit pill was consumed. The result was similar to what he expected. He had opened 21 spirit apertures, but it wasn't full. If he wanted to open 27 apertures, he would need at least 70 profound spirit pills. Among the ores he had, only Yuan magnetic ore was left. The other miscellaneous ores were sold to the Heavenly Secret Business Alliance in the previous 2 transactions. This time, he had to sell 2 pieces of Yuan magnetic ore to buy 70 spirit pills. Half a day later, Lu Yi walked into the Tianji Business Alliance. When he came out again, there were 81 spirit accumulation pills and a few spirit stones in his storage pouch. The slim figure stood by the window on the 2nd floor of the Merchant Alliance. Looking at his back as he left, that person hesitated for a long time before he sighed and tapped the back of his hand. A mark immediately appeared on the back of his hand. Unlike the blue mark on the back of Lu Ye's hand, the mark on the woman's hand was yellow. She softly opened her mouth and spoke a few words to the imprint. The imprint then disappeared. After the time it took to brew a cup of tea, she walked out of the merchant union. Acquaintances greeted her, and she greeted them with a smile. In the Emerald Cloud Mountain, Lu Yi was rushing towards the cave. He didn't know if it was just his imagination, but after leaving the Emerald Cloud Market, he had a strange feeling. However, he couldn't pinpoint exactly what was strange about it. It wasn't until just now that he had made a few big circles in the forest that he suddenly discovered a figure appearing near him. However, before he could see clearly, the figure disappeared. Am I being targeted? Lu Yi suddenly became vigilant. Every time he entered and left the market, he was extremely careful, especially on the return trip. The previous 2 times were fine, but this time, he was actually targeted by an inexplicable cultivator. This made him a little puzzled. He didn't know if the person chasing him was specifically looking for him or if it was a coincidence. If it was the latter, then it was fine, but if it was the former, then it was somewhat thought-provoking. Fortunately, the other party's speed wasn't very fast. Under Lu Ye's full strength, it would be difficult for that person to catch up with him. From this, it seemed that the other party's cultivation wasn't very high. This wasn't difficult to understand. Cultivators who could appear in the outer circle of the battlefield weren't very high in cultivation. Just as he was thinking about this, spiritual power suddenly surged behind him, followed by a chill. Lu Yi turned his head and saw an icicle piercing through the air, arriving in front of him in the blink of an eye. Lu Yi was shocked. He hurriedly turned around and drew his sword. While urging his spiritual power, the long sword broke through the icicle, scattering fragments of cold air on Lu Ye's face. Affected by the impact of the icicle, Lu Yi lost his footing and staggered a few steps back. He took advantage of the momentum and rolled a little before regaining his footing. He was in an extremely sorry state. However, by the time he got up, the attacker had already pounced in front of him. It was a man who was a few years older than him. His face was white and beardless, and he had 2 fist-sized earrings hanging from his ears, giving him a rather exotic feeling. The weapon in his hand was like a saber or a sword. It was longer than an ordinary sword, but only half the width of a normal saber. It looked somewhat similar to the legendary embroidered spring saber. Taking advantage of the moment when Lu Yi got up, the fair-skinned male cultivator slashed down with his saber. In a hurry, Lu Yi didn't have time to urge the sharpness spirit pattern to enhance his long sword. He could only raise his sword to block. With a clang, sparks flew everywhere. Lu Ye's hand went numb and the long sword in his hand almost flew out. He was also pressed down by the saber and almost knelt on the ground. Oh! The fair-skinned man seemed a little surprised. He didn't expect Lu Yi to block his attack. Just as he was feeling surprised, the long sword in Lu Ye's hand had already blocked his weapon and stabbed towards his chest. The fair-skinned man remained calm and his long saber trembled a few times. Before Lu Yi could react, he felt a sharp pain in his arm. The long sword that he had thrust out also lost its strength and was easily dodged by his opponent. The sword pierced the air, causing Lu Ye's body to lean forward. A flash of saber light was imprinted in his eyes. Lu Yi felt a chill all over his body and only felt the aura of death rushing towards him. With a clang, the long saber struck Lu Ye's chest, but it didn't feel like it had cut his flesh. Instead, Lu Yi was sent flying. Looking at Lu Yi again, his body was enveloped in a layer of golden light. It was this layer of golden light that protected him and prevented him from being seriously injured. However, he realized that he was no match for his opponent and hurriedly took out a defensive talisman and slapped it on his body. Golden body talisman. The fair-skinned man's eyes were a little red. It wasn't that he was jealous that Lu Yi had a talisman to use, but this talisman should have been his spoils of war, but it was wasted by Lu Yi, making him feel distressed. However, he was now sure that the information he received was correct. This second-order spirit stream realm rogue cultivator was really rich. Otherwise, how could he have a talisman to use? One had to know that a random talisman was worth 10 or 20 spirit stones. Low-level cultivators rarely used talismans in battles. Most people didn't have that much money. At most, they would prepare 1 or 2 for emergency use. Looking at the golden light enveloping Lu Yi, the fair-skinned man floated back several meters. He held his saber in one hand and formed a seal with the other. As the corners of his mouth curled into a sneer, visible spirit energy gathered at his fingertips. Chapter 49. In the blink of an eye, an icicle appeared in front of the fair-skinned man. Under the mottled sunlight, the icicle reflected a rainbow-colored light. Lu Yi suddenly felt that something was wrong. Just now, he had gathered spiritual power in his eyes and clearly saw the spiritual light on the surface of his attacker's body. He judged that the other party was a cultivator above the 3rd layer of the spirit stream realm, but not yet at the 4th layer. The other party's cultivation was higher than his, and from the fact that he had inexplicably been hit by the other party's blade just now, his combat experience was also above his. Lu Yi had only cultivated for a short time and had not undergone any harsh cultivation, nor did he have any expert to guide him. The long sword in his hand was nothing more than the simplest slashes and stabs, and there were no moves or techniques to speak of. His cultivation was inferior, his skills were inferior, and his opponent even knew a spell technique. The situation was already very bad. Just as the icicle formed in the other party's hand, Lu Yi had already stomped his foot on the ground and rushed out with the help of the rebound force. Lu Ye's reaction stunned the fair-skinned cultivator. He had thought that the other party would immediately run away, but who would have thought that this opponent would not retreat and instead advance? His figure floated back again, and at the same time, the icicle shot out at an extremely fast speed. The sharp icicle hit Lu Ye's body and was blocked by the golden light on the surface of his body. Although it did not hurt him, the rebound force made his chest feel stuffy, and even his forward momentum slowed down a lot. The golden light on the surface of his body dimmed a bit. After the icicle shot out, spiritual light gathered in the fair-skinned man's hand again. He obviously wanted to condense a second icicle. The corners of Lu Ye's eyes twitched. In a fight between low-level cultivators, the side who knew a spell technique obviously had a big advantage. How many can you block? The fair-skinned man kept a safe distance from Lu Yi as he teased him. The two of them, one chasing and one retreating, in just a short while, Lu Yi had been hit by 3 icicles. The golden light on his body had dimmed to the point of being annihilated, but he could not even touch the corner of his opponent's clothes. This kind of battle made him feel sullen, and he wished he could take out a fire snake talisman to teach his opponent how to behave. However, he suppressed this impulse. He was not sure if a fire snake talisman could kill his opponent. This was a cultivator, not one of the wolves he had killed when he first came to the battlefield. At this time, he did not have the right terrain to fight the tiger. He already had a vague plan in his mind, but whether or not it could be carried out smoothly would depend on luck. After the time it would take to brew a cup of tea, when Lu Yi was hit by another icicle, the golden light around his body finally disappeared. Struck by the icicles, he had already suffered some internal injuries, blood flowing from the corners of his mouth. Enveloped by the cold, he couldn't help but shiver. He glared at the fair-skinned man with a resentful look on his face. He opened his mouth and spoke for the first time since the battle began. "What enmity do we have?" The fair-skinned man chuckled. "No grudge." Lu Yi remained silent, waiting for the rest of the story. "Sure enough," the fair and clear man said, "but if you can tell me where you found so many ores, I can spare your life." A sharp light flashed in Lu Ye's eyes as he confirmed where the problem lay. This confrontation was not a chance encounter, but someone had specifically come to find him. The reason was because of the ores he sold. To be honest, Lu Yi had been very careful. During the 3 trips to the Tianji Business Alliance, he had traded with different people. Moreover, he had only sold a small portion of the ores each time, not daring to sell too much for fear of attracting the attention of others. On the way back, he had even circled around a few times to make sure no one was following him. However, it turned out that someone was really up to no good. No matter how careful he was, it was useless unless he didn't go to the Tianji Business Alliance to sell things. However, he needed spiritual pills to cultivate, so where else could he go but the Tianji Business Alliance? What he could be sure of was that the Business Alliance wasn't the mastermind. Such a huge business alliance that claimed to be sincere and honest had no reason to target a small cultivator like him. Therefore, it was very likely that some people in the Business Alliance were secretly doing something. Lu Yi thought back to the 3 Business Alliance cultivators he had traded with, but he couldn't think of anyone who had targeted him. These 3 transactions were very ordinary. If there was anything unusual, it was only the first time when the woman called Lu Ruyan hinted at something. However, that didn't mean anything. From the fair-skinned man's words, the other party suspected that he had found a mineral vein that contained all kinds of ores, so he wanted to inquire about the location of the mineral vein. He didn't know that Lu Yi didn't have a mineral vein at all. His ores were all brought out from the Evil Moon Valley. Seeing that Lu Yi didn't speak, the fair-skinned man's face darkened. "You refuse a toast only to drink a forfeit." He made up his mind to beat Lu Yi half to death and then interrogate him about the location of the mineral vein. With that, he rushed toward Lu Yi with his saber. He didn't use the icicle spell again, mainly because it consumed too much energy. After breaking Lu Ye's golden body talisman, he was confident that he could crush Lu Yi at will. However, Lu Yi, who was acting tough just now, turned around and ran at lightning speed. The fair-skinned man was so angry that he laughed. Looking at Lu Ye's back, he said leisurely, "You think you can run away?" He chased after him unhurriedly. At the same time, he took out a spirit stone from his storage bag and held it in the palm of his hand to slowly recover. He could see that Lu Yi was scared out of his wits. Running for his life like this would only increase the consumption of his spiritual power. Once a low-level cultivator lost his spiritual power, he was no different from a mortal. Steward Yang, who was killed by Lu Yi, was a precedent. So, he just didn't lose Lu Yi. The two of them, one chasing and one fleeing, passed through a stone forest and crossed a small river. When they arrived at an open space, the fair-skinned man found Lu Yi standing there, gasping for breath. His face was as pale as paper, and he didn't move at all. Did he run out of spiritual power so quickly? The fair-skinned man sneered and slowly stepped forward. The long saber in his hand twirled. Why aren't you running anymore? He stood about 10 feet in front of Lu Yi with a mocking look on his face. However, he soon found that something was wrong because Lu Yi's expression was extremely frightened. He was looking in a certain direction, and the hand holding the sword was trembling violently. A fishy wind blew and a low roar sounded. Behind a big tree, a big tiger with a strong body and snow-white body walked out leisurely. Its amber eyes looked at the fair-skinned man, causing him to be shocked. He suddenly remembered a rumor he heard in the market 2 days ago. He couldn't be so unlucky, right? He wailed in his heart. However, something happened that made him despair. The big tiger opened its mouth and spat out human words. You dare to disturb this king's dream? I think you don't want to live anymore. The fair-skinned man's forehead was instantly covered with fine beads of sweat. He finally understood why Lu Yi was so frightened. The source of the fear wasn't him, but the big tiger. Just as he was at a loss, he heard Lu Yi say, "Tiger King, please spare us. We didn't know this was your territory. We'll leave now." When the fair-skinned man heard this, he nodded his head like a chicken pecking at rice. The big tiger roared and said angrily, "You come and go as you please. Where do you think this is?" Chapter 50. The tiger crouched in the forest, looking majestic. In front of the tiger, 2 figures were incomparably stiff. Just when the fair-skinned man was at a loss, he heard Lu Yi say, "Tiger King, please calm down. I know the rules. Let's follow the rules. Don't take my life." Saying so, he took off his storage pouch from his waist, pretended to circulate his spirit energy, and threw the storage pouch away. Not only that, he also threw away the long sword in his hand. Big Tiger looked at him and snorted softly, "Since you know the rules, I can spare your life." "Thank you, King." Big Tiger turned to look at the fair-skinned cultivator. "What about you? Do you want to die or live?" "I want to live." The fair-skinned cultivator blurted out with a pained expression. He copied Lu Yi and untied the storage bag from his waist, opened the restriction lock, and threw it on the ground in front of him. He had heard some rumors in the market before that there was a demonic beast that could speak human language in Qingyun Mountain. Many cultivators had encountered it, but the demonic beast generally didn't harm people's lives. It was only interested in spirit pills and spirit stones. As long as a cultivator was willing to pay a price, they could escape from the tiger's mouth. He didn't expect to encounter this demonic beast when he was just chasing Lu Yi into the mountain. This was really bad luck. Big Tiger was satisfied with the performance of the two and said, "Don't play any tricks. If I find out that you didn't open the restriction lock, humph." The threat was self-evident. "It's open." Lu Yi and the fair-skinned cultivator said in unison. Not only that, Lu Yi pointed at the fair-skinned cultivator, "King, he hasn't thrown away his weapon yet. I'm afraid he wants to harm you." The fair-skinned cultivator was stunned and cursed Lu Yi in his heart. Big Tiger was also startled, but he soon turned to look at the fair-skinned cultivator and let out a threatening growl. Clang! The fair-skinned cultivator threw away the long sword in his hand. His heart was almost bleeding. One had to know that the long saber in his hand was a spirit weapon. Although its grade was very low, it was still a spirit weapon. A low-level cultivator with a spirit weapon and without one were two completely different concepts. It could be said that a spirit weapon could increase his strength by 10%. However, his life was more important right now. If he angered such a demonic beast, he would definitely not have a good ending. Compared to his own life, all worldly possessions could be thrown away. "Your Majesty, if there is nothing else, we will take our leave," Lu Yi said. Scram! Big Tiger roared carelessly. Lu Yi and the fair-skinned cultivator both slowly retreated, not exposing their backs to Dahu. This was a normal response. Anyone who faced a threat would be vigilant. However, after retreating a few feet, the fair-skinned cultivator was stunned to find that Lu Yi had suddenly rushed out, grabbing the long sword that had been thrown on the ground, and pouncing towards him like thunder. The fair-skinned cultivator turned pale with fright. He didn't expect Lu Yi to have such an outrageous move. In front of a tiger, shouldn't it be more important to save his life? Where did he get the guts? He didn't have time to think. Almost as soon as Lu Yi made his move, he lunged forward, arriving in front of his weapon in a few steps. He grabbed it and poured his spiritual power into it, causing it to glow. A strong wind blew in his face. The fair-skinned cultivator didn't even have time to think, and the long sword in his hand met it. With a clang, the fair-skinned cultivator's body, which had not yet fully stood up, was suddenly pressed down and knelt on the ground. One was premeditated, and the other was a hasty response. This time, Lu Yi had the upper hand. The fair-skinned cultivator suddenly looked up and saw Lu Ye's calm and indifferent eyes. At this moment, he vaguely noticed something. But before he could think, Lu Yi had already stabbed with his sword. The fair-skinned cultivator hurriedly urged his spiritual power to protect his body, and at the same time, he slashed at Lu Yi. However, he didn't expect that his protective spiritual power didn't have the slightest effect. The long sword directly pierced through his heart and came out of his body. Lu Yi kicked out again, sending the fair-skinned cultivator flying, and the long sword drew a string of blood from his heart. In the blink of an eye, the outcome of the battle had been decided. Lu Yi didn't know whether his opponent was dead or not, so he didn't rush forward. Instead, he took out an offensive talisman from his storage bag and held it in his hand, just in case. If his opponent dared to stand up, he would immediately activate the talisman. But looking around, the fair-skinned cultivator's body, which was lying on the ground, twitched a few times and then stopped moving. It seemed that his sword had stabbed a vital point. The battle between cultivators was so thrilling, and life and death could often be decided in a very short time. The ground was dyed red with blood, and the pungent smell of blood filled the air. Lu Yi gasped for breath a few times, calming his violent heartbeat. A little red light suddenly flew out from the fair-skinned cultivator's body and swept into the back of Lu Ye's hand. What? On top of Big Tiger's head, Yi Yi's figure appeared, looking at Lu Yi somewhat at a loss. Just now, Lu Yi suddenly rushed over here and hurriedly said to her, "Help me rob." Then, the fair-skinned cultivator chased after them. Yi Yi understood what happened to Lu Yi and cooperated with Big Tiger to put on a show. Anyway, this was what they were good at, and they could also rob some good things while they were at it, so why not? But, wasn't it a robbery? Why did someone die? Yi Yi slowly came to her senses. The ones who wanted to rob were her and Big Tiger, and Lu Yi wanted to kill from the beginning to the end, but he was just borrowing their power. You lied to me. Yi Yi glared at Lu Yi. Lu Yi glanced at her and criticized, "Your acting is too exaggerated." What? Yi Yi was confused. Lu Yi was about to say something when a slight sound suddenly came from not far away. He only hesitated for a moment, then rushed out, and at the same time, said, "Your secret has been exposed, and there are people nearby. If you don't want to die, hurry up and come over." Yi Yi wanted to cry, but no tears came out. She felt like she had boarded a pirate ship and couldn't get out. She and Big Tiger looked at each other, then Yi Yi gritted her teeth and said, "Chase." Big Tiger roared and ran away on all fours. In the forest, the enchanting female cultivator was panic-stricken and fled for her life. She felt like she had done something very wrong. But could she be blamed for that? She just wanted to live a better life. She didn't want to flatter those disgusting customers anymore. They were all itinerant cultivators, so why did she have to live under their whims day and night? If this matter went smoothly, her life would be much better in the future. But she never thought that the person she was looking for would fail. Ever since she left the Tianji Business Alliance, she followed the traces left behind by that person all the way here. Originally, she thought that she could just sit there and enjoy the loot, but the scene she saw was that itinerant cultivator named Lu Yi killed the person she found. In her panic, she exposed her whereabouts and was now being hunted down. She didn't want to die. She was still young and had a lot of good days ahead of her. How could she die in a place like this? But the sound of the pursuit behind her was getting closer and closer. She knew that she was doomed. Chapter 51. Lu Yi focused his spiritual power on his legs, increasing the speed of his pursuit significantly. This was a small trick he had unintentionally discovered during his travels in and out of Azure Cloud Mountain. A cultivator's spiritual power had many wonderful uses. If it was focused on the eyes, they could see things they normally couldn't. If it was focused on the legs, they could run faster. If it was focused on the sword, it could increase the lethality of the weapon. The terrain of the mountain forest was complex, and there were large trees everywhere. The person in front of him was naturally not as familiar with the terrain as Lu Yi, and the distance between them was constantly closing. When Lu Yi saw the person's back, all his questions were answered. He knew who was behind all this. This result surprised him because he didn't think he had any grudges with the other party. In fact, he had only met them once. Roar! A snow-white figure suddenly appeared in front of him, blocking the person's path. It was Big Tiger. The person was scared out of his wits by Big Tiger. He screamed and threw out the talisman he had been holding in his hand. The talisman turned into a crescent-shaped slash in the air, heading straight for Big Tiger. Big Tiger hurriedly dodged, but the crescent-shaped slash barely missed its body and cut through the trunk of a large tree behind it. The penetrative power of the talisman was obvious. Seeing that his attack had failed, the person's expression became even more panicked. He hurriedly pulled something out of his storage pouch. A small figure had quietly climbed onto her back and let out an ear-piercing shriek. Lu Yi saw the person's body shrink, as if something heavy was pressing down on him. At the same time, his hand paused. This reminded Lu Yi of the first time he had encountered Yi and Big Tiger in the cave. At that time, he had been ambushed by Yi like this. With this delay, Lu Yi rushed in front of her and slashed down with his sword. A snow-white sword light flashed, and an arm flew off, blood spraying everywhere. The pain caused her to scream. Although she was a rogue cultivator, because of her outstanding figure and appearance, it hadn't been long since she had entered the Spirit Stream battlefield that she had caught the eye of someone from the Heavenly Secret Merchant Alliance. She had been recruited into the Merchant Alliance, and hadn't had a chance to fight anyone since. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that she was a flower raised in a greenhouse. Most of the people in the Business Alliance were like this. They didn't need to fight with others, and didn't have the hardships and dangers of the battlefield like the disciples of the various sections. They only cared about doing business. Big Tiger pounced on her and pushed her to the ground, roaring fiercely. A fishy wind blew in her face, and she almost fainted from fright. What frightened her even more was the sound of footsteps coming from the side. Turning her head, she saw Lu Yi, whose sword was pointing diagonally at the ground, with blood still flowing from the blade, walking towards her step by step. When she got closer, Lu Yi looked down at her and said indifferently, "Lu Ruyan." This woman was the one who had made a deal with him the first time he had visited the Heavenly Secret Business Alliance. "Don't kill me. I beg you, don't kill me." Lu Ruyan's makeup was ruined by her tears as she begged continuously. "No one. I was possessed by a ghost and became greedy." In her great fear, Lu Ruyan naturally spoke whatever was on her mind. She didn't even wait for Lu Yi to ask her any more questions. She simply blurted out the cause and effect. "So that's how it is." Lu Yi raised his sword. Sensing Lu Ye's killing intent, Lu Ruyan shouted, "Don't kill me. I'll give you anything you want." The long sword fell, but Big Tiger dodged in time. The blade, reinforced by spiritual energy, slashed across Lu Ruyan's fair and slender neck. A yellow light flew out from the back of Lu Ruyan's snow-white hand and swept into Lu Ye's right hand. The headless corpse twitched, and blood gushed out like a fountain from its neck. It took a while for it to stop. Yi's eyelids twitched. Everything that had happened today had refreshed her understanding of Lu Yi. Only now did she understand that Big Tiger had been lucky not to die at this guy's hands. This guy wasn't easy to talk to. Lu Yi bent down and took the storage bag from Lu Ruyan's waist. He then reached out and searched her body. Of course, he wasn't doing this to take advantage of her. He just wanted to see if she had a storage bag hidden on her body. He himself had a storage bag hidden on his body. Judging from the situation, he felt that others might have one as well. Unfortunately, Lu Ruyan didn't have this habit. After all, she was a member of the merchant union. She didn't need to fight with others and didn't need to take risks outside. Her storage bag was very safe on her body. Lu Ruyan's storage bag was open. Lu Yi checked it briefly and found some useful items. Dispose of the body, Lu Yi ordered. Huh? Yi looked at him incredulously, as if to say, are you kidding me? Lu Yi took out a bottle from Lu Ruyan's storage bag and tossed it in his hand. Okay. Yi responded quickly. She gave Big Tiger a look and hurriedly got to work. Lu Yi ran back to the spot where he'd killed the fair-skinned cultivator and picked up his storage bag as well as the fair-skinned cultivator's weapon. Less than an hour later, Lu Yi sat cross-legged in the cave where he was resting. His upper body was bare as he applied healing pills to his wounds. He didn't have many healing pills left in his possession. This time, he used 2 pills, so he only had 4 left. Thinking back to today's battle, Lu Yi didn't feel complacent because he'd killed a cultivator at the 3rd layer of the spiritual stream tier. Instead, he reflected on himself. Battles between low-level cultivators were mostly close combat. It could be said that most low-level cultivators walked the path of armament cultivators. Because their cultivation level wasn't high enough and their cultivation time was short, low-level cultivators didn't have the time or energy to study any kind of art. Only when they were strong enough would they gradually become clear about their future path. This time, the battle with the fair-skinned cultivator exposed a very serious problem, and that was that he had no skills to speak of in battle. This was something that couldn't be helped. It hadn't even been 3 months since he'd started cultivating. During this period of time, he'd been raising his cultivation level, so how could he have the spare energy to raise his battle skills? In the end, he'd been able to kill the fair-skinned cultivator because he'd borrowed Big Tiger's power and caught the other party off guard. However, he didn't know how to raise his skills. Without a suitable teacher to guide him, it was undoubtedly impossible to rely on his own fumbling around. Another problem was the weapon. Previously, he hadn't felt much about it. The long sword in his hand was left behind by Manager Yang after his death. Before that, he'd used this sword to kill Zhou Cheng, but the battle with Zhou Cheng had only lasted for a moment. Today, after a life-and-death battle with the fair-skinned cultivator, he'd truly noticed one thing, and that was that he was seriously incompatible with this long sword. No matter how he used this sword in his hand, it just didn't feel right. Swords were light and agile, and focused on skills. However, when he held the long sword, all he did was hack and slash, and he couldn't bring out the sword's advantages at all. With that thought in mind, Lu Yi put on his clothes again and picked up the long sword by his feet to examine it carefully. There were many nicks on the blade, all of which were caused by him hacking and slashing. In particular, there was a nick at the 3rd part of the blade, which was almost the size of a grain of rice. This kind of nick was very serious for a long sword, and he couldn't use it anymore. He picked up the fair-skinned cultivator's long sword again, stood up and played with it a few times. His brows raised. When he played with this thing, it was unexpectedly satisfying. Chapter 52. The saber was not an orthodox machete. It was longer than an ordinary sword, but the blade was very narrow, similar to the legendary embroidered spring saber. Lu Yi waved it a few times and found that it was very easy to use. The good result was that the sword could no longer be used, and he obtained a new weapon, saving him the trouble of buying another one. He tried to pour his spirit power into the saber, and a faint halo immediately gushed out from the long saber. The halo did not appear sharp, but instead gave off a sense of weight. What surprised Lu Yi even more was that he felt that there seemed to be something hidden in the saber. Closing his eyes, he sensed through the flow of his spirit power and gradually understood the situation inside the saber. There was a spirit pattern in the saber's body. This was a spirit weapon. Lu Yi revealed a look of surprise. He had entered and exited the market several times, and his current knowledge and experience was naturally far greater than when he had first entered the spirit stream battlefield. He had heard of spirit tools before. They were weapons that cultivators used exclusively, and a good spirit tool could often bring great benefits to its owner. Lu Ye's previous sword was a mortal weapon. Apart from being sharper, there was nothing special about it. However, spirit weapons were different. Depending on the type of spirit pattern engraved on it, each spirit weapon had its own unique power. This saber had a spirit pattern in it. Lu Yi could easily stimulate the power of the spirit pattern by pouring his spirit power into it, thus giving the saber the characteristics of the spirit pattern. He tested it for a moment and confirmed that the spirit pattern was used to strengthen the saber. This way, it would be difficult for the spirit weapon to be damaged when fighting with the enemy. Lu Yi suddenly understood. No wonder when he used the sharpness spirit pattern to strengthen his sword, he could not cut the other party's saber. This was a pleasant surprise. Although it sounded useless to strengthen the blade, it was actually a very practical spiritual pattern. Moreover, Lu Yi had mastered the sharpness spiritual pattern and could enhance the sharpness of this spiritual weapon at any time, greatly increasing its sharpness. With such a spirit weapon in hand, Lu Yi's strength could be increased by at least 10 to 20%. When he encountered enemies again, he could slash to his heart's content without worrying about the weapon being damaged. However, a spirit weapon with only one spirit pattern should be the lowest level of spirit weapons. Come in. Lu Yi sheathed the saber and sat down cross-legged again. At the entrance of the cave, a small figure slowly floated in. When it arrived in front of Lu Yi, it gave him a flattering smile and said, "The other person's body has also been dealt with." Lu Yi casually tossed out a storage pouch. It was none other than Lu Ruyan's. Yi took it and checked it. She said in surprise, "So much?" There were more than a bottle of spirit pills and a few spirit stones. Everything will be divided into 5. Thank you so much for this time. Lu Yi nodded at her. Although he had enough talismans and was confident that he could kill the fair-skinned man, he would not be able to open his storage pouch if he really did so. Moreover, he would have to take some risks. When he went to look for Big Tiger and Yi, he had the intention of borrowing their power. Fortunately, Yi was smart enough. He only needed to say one sentence, and Yi knew what to do. This time, the cooperation was easy and pleasant. There were not many good things in the fair-skinned man's storage pouch. The only valuable thing was his weapon. Lu Ruyan was richer, but not by much. Moreover, the talisman in Lu Ruyan's hand was activated at the last moment. If Big Tiger had not blocked the spear for him, Lu Yi would have to face the power of the talisman himself. It would be much more dangerous. Lu Yi took half of the items and kept the spirit weapon for himself. It was a profit for him. Yi did not expect Lu Yi to be so generous. She looked at him with a complicated expression and finally thanked him. Wait. Lu Yi stopped her. Yi looked back. You should have heard the words of the woman you killed earlier. Yes. Although she acted in private and her death was not regrettable, she was still a member of the Tianji Business Alliance. I don't know how the Business Alliance will react after her death, but you'd better change your territory. This place is too close to the Green Cloud Market. If the Business Alliance wants to investigate her death, they will easily trace it back to you. What about you? Yi asked. I'll leave here soon. This incident had taught Lu Yezhong a lesson. Now, the spirit pills he needed for his cultivation were all obtained through the sale of magnetic ores, and the only channel to sell them was the Tianji Business Alliance. He had only gone there 3 times, and Lu Ruyan had already set her eyes on him. Who knew if there was a second Lu Ruyan in there? So, he was not going to stay here any longer. If reaching the first-order spirit stream realm gave him the qualifications to survive in the spirit stream battlefield, then reaching the second order gave him the capital to walk freely. He did not care what decision Yi and Big Tiger would make. The spirit stream battlefield was too big, and he might not have a chance to see them again in the future. However, out of morality, he kindly reminded them. After Yi left, Lu Yi counted the materials in his hands. There were 93 profound spirit pills, of which 81 were bought from the Tianji Business Alliance and 12 were obtained after splitting the spoils with Yi. There were 4 spirit stones, which were also obtained after splitting the spoils. He had used all his own spirit stones to buy food. There were 7 healing pills, of which 4 were his own and 3 were found in the fair-skinned man's storage bag. On the other hand, there were no healing pills in Lu Ruyan's storage bag. She probably did not expect that there would be a time when she would need them. There were less than 30 spirit talismans. There were 26 pieces of yuan magnetic ore, both large and small. There was 1 saber, the lowest grade spirit artifact. The golden cicada free art. The current number of pills was enough for him to reach the third-order spirit stream realm. Once he reached the third-order spirit stream realm, his strength would definitely increase. He would not dare to say that he could run rampant in the outer ring of the battlefield, but at the very least, his ability to protect himself would increase. He vaguely felt that he had forgotten something, but after thinking about it for a long time, he finally remembered. Immediately, he poured his world energy into the back of his right hand, causing it to ripple and turn into a blue spirit tattoo. This spirit tattoo wriggled and changed, and a few lines of large characters appeared in Lu Ye's vision. Name, Lu Yi. Identity, Blue Blood Sect Disciple Cultivation, 21 Apertures. Location, Spirit Stream Battlefield. Merit, 8. Compared to the first time he saw the battlefield imprint, his name, identity, and location had not changed, but his cultivation had increased from 3 apertures to 21 apertures. This was the result of Lu Ye's hard work over the past 2 months, so there was nothing to be concerned about. What he was concerned about was the merit. When he first saw this, he was very puzzled. What exactly was this merit and how to obtain it? Only now did he have a faint understanding. This merit could only be obtained by killing someone. He remembered that when the fair-skinned man died, a red light floated out from the back of his hand and flew into the back of his hand. However, when Lu Ruyan died, a yellow beam of light flew out. Different colors of light represented different factions. In that case, the fair-skinned cultivator he killed should belong to the Myriad Demons Ridge, and the Heavenly Secret Commerce Union was considered a neutral faction. So it did business on both sides. However, Lu Yi did not know what this merit was for now. He could only slowly explore it in the future. Chapter 53. Since he had decided to leave this place, an accurate map was essential. So before that, whether he was willing or not, he had to make a trip to Green Cloud Market. The next morning, Lu Ye's figure appeared in the Tianji Business Alliance. According to what Lu Ruyan had said before her death, she had accidentally met Lu Yi when he went to the Business Alliance for the second time to make a deal. It just so happened that she was familiar with the person called Lu Quan, and through Lu Quan, she had inquired about the contents of the deal. At that time, Lu Ruyan had guessed that Lu Yi had a rich vein of ore in his hands and had evil thoughts. In the end, she could not suppress the greed in her heart and contacted the fair-skinned man, telling him to be ready at any time. After that, Lu Ruyan had been paying attention every day. It was not until Lu Yi went to the Business Alliance for the 3rd time and made an even bigger deal that she made up her mind that the fair-skinned man chased after her. Lu Rian was afraid that the fair-skinned man would take all the benefits for himself, so not long after Lu Yi left, she took a leave of absence and followed him all the way here. Who would have thought that she would see the scene of Lu Yi killing the fair-skinned man with his own hands? In the end, she also lost her life. It was impossible for Lu Rian to lie in the state before her death, so no one should know if she was alive or dead in the short term. For the time being, he was safe, which was why Lu Yi hurried to the business alliance. He had been selling magnetic ores bit by bit, afraid that he would attract the attention of others. Every time he sold them, he would only sell them to meet his needs for cultivation for a short period of time. Now that he had decided to leave this place, there was no need to worry so much. He would first obtain a map to determine the location of the Blue Blood Sex Station. An hour later, in a compartment, Lu Yi was drinking tea until he was full. A middle-aged man politely handed a palm-sized white jade disc to Lu Yi, along with 2 bottles of 18 yun spirit pills, 3 bottles of 15 healing pills, and more than 10 spirit stones. This time, Lu Yi had sold 12 pieces of magnetic ores in one go. He had obtained more than 600 spirit stones. In the outer circle of the battlefield, this was undoubtedly a big deal, worthy of the middle-aged man's courteous treatment of Lu Yi. The facts proved that if it weren't for some coincidences, doing business in the Tianji Business Alliance was very safe. Lu Yi had come here 4 times, and each time, he dealt with a different person. Unless he took out too many goods like this time, it was very difficult to be targeted. Of course, being targeted was also because Lu Ye's strength wasn't high enough. If he was a 4th or 5th order spirit stream cultivator, then Lu Rian wouldn't dare to be disloyal no matter what. After the transaction was completed, the middle-aged man walked Lu Yi to the door and gave him a name card. He told Lu Yi that if he wanted to sell anything in the future, he could contact him in advance and he would definitely give him a good price. This was a treatment that Lu Yi had not received in the previous 3 times. Regarding this, Lu Yi naturally agreed. After leaving the Tianji Business Alliance, Lu Yi exchanged all the spirit stones for food and some daily necessities. Spirit stones were not of much use to him. He might have to travel a long distance on this trip, and he would have to spend some time in the open. Some daily necessities were essential. Fortunately, he had enough storage pouches, so he didn't have to worry about not having enough space. After this transaction, the number of profound spirit pills in Lu Ye's hands increased to 111, and he also had 22 healing pills. However, he only had 14 pieces of yuan magnetic ore left. Originally, he thought that the yuan magnetic ore in his hands would be enough for him to use for a long time, and he might even be able to cultivate to the 9th order spirit stream realm. But now, it seemed that these things were not enough at all. He had to hurry back to the Blue Blood Sex Station as soon as possible. Only by returning to the sex station would he be safe. Half a day later, Lu Yi returned to the cave where he was staying and took out the white jade disc. This was the map of the Spirit Stream battlefield. It included the distribution of the bases of the various great forces on the battlefield, as well as the terrain of the battlefield itself, as well as some dangerous places. However, when he remembered that this thing was worth 600 spirit stones, Lu Ye's heart ached. He had not spent 600 spirit stones since he started cultivating, but in order to return to the sex station, this was the price he had to pay. The only thing that comforted him was that this thing could be updated at the Tianji Business Alliance's sub-union at any time, so it would never be out of date. Holding the white jade disc with both hands, Lu Yi poured his spirit energy into it. Immediately, a soft light flowed out of the disc, forming a halo on its surface. The halo twisted and changed, and in the blink of an eye, it turned into a map. What surprised Lu Yi was that this was not a flat map, but a 3-dimensional map. He saw that there were many undulating mountain ranges on the map, and the height of each mountain range was different. Somewhere on the map, there was a flickering dot of light. Lu Yi shifted his gaze to that spot, and the dot of light did not change. However, when he focused his spirit energy on the dot of light, the area it covered was immediately enlarged. With the influx of spirit energy, the map continued to enlarge. However, the disk was only so big, so as the map was enlarged, the area it could cover gradually decreased. Finally, the map was enlarged to its limit, and Lu Yi saw that the dot of light was located in an undulating mountain range. The mountain range was labeled as Azure Cloud Mountain. Looking around, there was a place labeled as Azure Cloud Market Number 3. Lu Yi immediately understood that the dot of light was his current location. And Azure Cloud Market Number 3 was the market he frequented. In addition to this market, there were also Azure Cloud Market Number 1, Azure Cloud Market Number 2, and all the way to Lu Ye's location. In other words, there were a total of 6 markets in the entire periphery of Azure Cloud Mountain. After playing with it for a while, Lu Yi gradually figured out how to use this map. He began to look for the location of the Jade Blood sect while secretly praying that he was not too far away from the sect's encampment. If he was too far away, he did not know how long it would take for him to return. The Jade Blood sect was a 9th grade sect, so its encampment was naturally in the periphery, which reduced the difficulty of searching. Lu Yi searched little by little, his gaze sweeping over one name after another. At one point, he almost thought that he had found the words Jade Blood Sect, but when he looked carefully, it was Jade Heart Sect, which made him angry. After half a circle, Lu Yi still hadn't found the Jade Blood Sect, but his nervous mood relaxed, because this meant that the situation couldn't be any worse. After a while, he still did not find it, but Lu Ye's mood became happy because this meant that he was not too far away from the Jade Blood Sect. Finally, Lu Ye's gaze fixed on a certain location on the map, where there were 3 large words. It was the Jade Blood sect he had been looking for. Found it. After calming down a little, Lu Yi shrank the map and compared the location between himself and the Jade Blood sect. His current location was a little to the west of the map, while the Blue Blood sect's location was a little to the west of the map. In other words, if he wanted to go to the Jade Blood sect's encampment, he would have to go west and cross a quarter of the entire battlefield. The situation was not bad, but it was still acceptable. Chapter 54. While searching for the Jade Blood sect's encampment, Lu Yi noticed that the words on the map were divided into 4 colors: red, yellow, blue, and white. Green Cloud Market 3 was marked in yellow, while the Jade Blood sect was marked in blue. From the looks of it, the areas marked in blue should be the Grand Heaven Alliance's camp, the red was the Myriad Demons Ridge, and the yellow was the neutral area. As for the white, Lu Yi guessed that it was an unclaimed land. Most of the mountains and rivers were marked in white. Looking at the entire map, the red and blue words were interspersed with each other in an intricate manner. If the map was compared to a chessboard, the red and blue marks were the chess pieces of the 2 camps. Many years of conflict and entanglement had turned the chess pieces of the 2 camps into 2 large dragons on the chessboard, strangling each other. Lu Yi had not really integrated into the battlefield yet, but from the positions of the chess pieces on the map, he could feel the danger of this camp war. However, the general situation of the world had nothing to do with him for the time being. He was just a nameless cultivator in the 2nd layer of the spirit stream realm. Right now, he only wanted to hurry to the Jade Blood sect's encampment. Lu Yi carefully plotted his route and slowly came up with a plan. The light at the entrance of the cave dimmed. Lu Yi looked up and saw Big Tiger stepping in. Yi popped out from Big Tiger's head and said cheerfully, "You didn't leave." She came once in the morning but did not see Lu Yi. She thought he had left. "I'm about to leave." "What's the matter?" Lu Yi put away the map. This thing was related to whether he could smoothly return to the Jade Blood sect's encampment. At the same time, it was the most precious thing he had, so he naturally had to keep it safe. "I want to talk to you." Yi floated forward and sat in front of Lu Yi, her small face tense. Lu Yi did not understand why this girl was acting like she wanted to negotiate. He frowned and asked, "Talk about what?" Yi said, "Leave this place." "Where are you going?" "That has nothing to do with you." "All right." Yi also knew that she was asking nonsense. They were not related to each other, and their previous interactions were not very pleasant. The only time they worked together was to kill the fair-skinned man and Lu Ruyan. She was in no position to ask about Lu Ye's whereabouts. Looking at her conflicted expression, Lu Yi said impatiently, "What's the matter?" Yi's expression became more and more conflicted. Big Tiger stepped forward and nudged her back. Yi gritted her teeth and looked at Lu Yi and said, "Can you take us with you?" "What?" Lu Yi doubted he heard. "Take us with you," Yi repeated. "Why?" Yi said, "You said before that if we kill that woman, the Tianji Business Alliance might trace it back to us. This place is no longer safe, so we have to leave. But we don't know where to go. The battlefield is huge. You can go anywhere you want." Yi's suggestion surprised Lu Yi. He had never thought of such a thing before, nor did he expect Yi to come over and tell him about it. But you're the one who killed him." "We didn't want to kill anyone." Yi looked aggrieved. After returning yesterday, Yi suddenly realized that she and Big Tiger were resting in the territory. Lu Yi lured a cultivator over and asked them to help him rob. In the end, they killed the cultivator and a member of the Tianji Business Alliance. They did not understand what happened from beginning to end. They were just sitting at home, but trouble fell from the sky. "Didn't you split the loot?" Lu Yi looked at her in confusion. Since they killed together and shared the loot, they naturally had to take the risk together. Yi opened her mouth and was speechless. In the end, she could only say, "Why can't you take us with you? You're too young." "Huh?" Yi looked at Lu Yi in a daze. After a while, she reacted. She crossed her arms and blushed. Rogue. God knew how a spirit like her could blush. Lu Yi stood up and patted his butt. "Is there anything else? If not, I'm leaving. After this farewell, we may not meet again. I wish you all the best." Yi couldn't figure out how her small size had anything to do with Lu Yi not bringing them along. But seeing that Lu Yi was really about to leave, she also became anxious. She wasn't a little girl who didn't know anything. When she was alive, she was a cultivator, but after she died, she was coincidentally transformed into a nightmare spirit by Big Tiger. Although she lost a lot of her memories, she still remembered the cruelty of the cultivation world. She and Big Tiger seemed cool when they occupied the territory, but in reality, they were treading on thin ice. No one knew when disaster would fall from the sky. When that time came, she and Big Tiger would not be able to resist it. She had considered finding a cultivator to rely on, but the cultivators she came into contact with in the outer circle were so weak. How could she take a liking to them? Maybe they would sell Big Tiger out as soon as she relied on them. Lu Yi was different. This guy must be a disciple of a big sect. Otherwise, it was impossible for him to have so many talismans. Moreover, in the past 2 months, Yi had seen Lu Yi become stronger bit by bit. His growth speed was terrifying. She felt that following Lu Yi was a good choice. This guy looked a little annoying, but in fact, he had his own set of principles. Take the spoils collected yesterday as an example. If Lu Yi wanted to take it all alone, she and Big Tiger could not do anything. But Lu Yi divided it equally with them. Because of this, Yi made up her mind. If she continued to stay here, she would only slowly wait for death. Following Lu Yi was the way out. That was why she came to say these words to Lu Yi. They brushed past each other. Lu Yi felt his clothes being grabbed. He turned his head and saw Yi looking up at him pitifully. There seemed to be tears in her eyes. Lu Yi was indifferent. "Crying is useless to me." Yi still looked at him. They looked at each other in a deadlock. After a long while, Lu Yi said with a headache, "I'll give you 3 chances to persuade me." Yi's eyes lit up as if she had already thought of what to say. She hurriedly said, "You also know that low-level cultivators are afraid of Hupa. If you encounter any enemies you can't beat in the future, I can cooperate with Hupa to scare them. Those enemies will definitely retreat in the face of difficulties." Lu Yi rubbed his chin and pondered. He nodded and said, "What you said makes sense." Yi was encouraged and said, "Also, if you're in a hurry, you can ride Hoopa. You can save energy and maintain your condition to deal with unexpected situations. Also, it runs very fast. If you're being chased, it can help you escape. It will listen to me." Lu Yi looked at Big Tiger. Lu Yi had experienced Big Tiger's speed yesterday. When he went to chase Lu Ruyan, Big Tiger had set off later than him, but it had blocked Lu Ruyan's path. If it hadn't been for Big Tiger blocking Lu Ruyan's path, Lu Yi would have had to go through a lot of trouble to catch up to her. "Of course it will." Yi nodded. Also. Yi said eagerly. She didn't continue for a long time. Finally, she patted her chest. "Me too." "You?" Lu Yi looked down at her. "I can sneak attack others. Just like yesterday." Yi raised her head and puffed out her chest. Chapter 55. The combination of Big Tiger and Yi was very intimidating. Low-level cultivators with little experience would easily be intimidated by a monster beast that could only speak, and riding Big Tiger was undoubtedly very tempting. The journey to the Blue Blood Sect station was long, and Lu Yi didn't know when he would arrive. If he rode Big Tiger, he could save energy on the road and even cultivate. For him, this was a very good choice. After all, his cultivation was still low, and he had to focus on improving his strength. If he traveled by himself, he wouldn't be able to cultivate on the road and would waste a lot of time. He originally didn't plan to bring this spirit and tiger with him. Saying that he would be moved by Yi's words was just an excuse. He originally planned to refuse no matter what Yi said. But now, he found that Yi's words had moved him a little. "What do you think?" "What do you think?" Yi looked at Lu Yi with eager eyes, afraid that he would say no. "It's not impossible." Before Yi could cheer, she heard Lu Yi change the topic, "But we have to agree on 3 rules." Yi was puzzled. "What 3 rules?" Lu Yi raised a finger. "First, I'm in charge of everything. If there's anything we disagree on, you have to listen to me." Yi nodded. "That's no problem." Since they had decided to come and join Lu Yi, she and Big Tiger were already mentally prepared. "Second, maybe sometimes I'll ask you to do something. If it's within your ability, you can't refuse. Of course, I won't ask you to do anything that endangers your lives. If such a situation occurs, you can make your own judgment based on the situation. Okay. Third, if one day you don't want to stay, let me know. Don't leave without a word." "We won't." Yi shook her head. "If there's no problem with these, then, let's have a happy cooperation." Lu Yi reached out a hand to Yi. Yi tilted her head and looked at him with a puzzled expression, but she still imitated him and reached out her hand. Lu Yi took it and shook it gently. Yi understood what he meant. She squinted her eyes and smiled. Happy cooperation. Big Tiger also let out a whimper behind her. Yi jumped on Big Tiger's head and looked at Lu Yi, as a show of sincerity. "I have something to give you." "Something?" Yi spat out these 3 words. Lu Yi suddenly became interested. In the depths of Mount Azure Cloud, in another area adjacent to Big Tiger's territory, Lu Yi was led by Big Tiger and Yi to an extremely hidden cave entrance. The entrance of the cave was covered by a large patch of weeds and shrubs. If one was not familiar with the terrain, it would be very difficult to find this cave. "Is this the place?" Lu Yi poked his head into the cave. It was pitch black inside, and he couldn't see anything. "Yes." Yi and Big Tiger led the way and Lu Yi. Lu Yi had a long saber at his waist, his hand on the hilt, ready to deal with any unexpected situations. According to Yi, there was a snake-type demon beast residing in the depths of the cave. She and Big Tiger had once entered this place and suffered a loss at the hands of the demon snake. However, they had also discovered a secret. That secret was the benefit she said she would give Lu Yi. The cave was slanted downwards, and Lu Yi felt that he had already sunk several hundred feet into the ground, but he still hadn't reached the end, which showed how deep this cave was. At this point, he could no longer feel the coolness of the surroundings. Instead, he could feel waves of heat gushing out from the front. The further they went, the thicker the heat became. Yi began to pant and finally stopped. "I can't go any deeper." She was a spirit after all, and this kind of hot environment was not good for her. Lu Yi suddenly understood. "You came here last time when you were injured?" Yi nodded. "That thing can only be found here." "Hoopa will go with you. That snake isn't very strong. With Big Tiger, you should be able to take it down. Then you wait here." Lu Yi nodded and continued on with Big Tiger. After walking for a long time, Lu Yi suspected that they were already more than 300 meters underground. The heat here was extremely strong. Lu Yi used his spirit energy to protect himself, but the heat was unbearable. As for Big Tiger, his tongue was hanging out and he looked dispirited, like a dog suffering from heatstroke. After a while, they finally reached the end. It was an underground karst cave, and the space wasn't small. Standing at the entrance, Lu Yi saw a large snake coiled up in the depths of the cave. The snake's body was as thick as his thigh, and he didn't know how long it was. It raised its head high and breathed towards a small tree about half the height of a person. The small tree was completely red, like a red-hot iron. There were 2 fist-sized fruits on the tree, and the entire karst cave was filled with a strange fragrance. Barrier-breaking fruit. This was the benefit that Yi had mentioned before. If it were an ordinary item, with Lu Ye's current status, it might not be able to move him. However, the barrier-breaking fruit was different. This thing was very useful for cultivators to break through the barriers of their spiritual cavities. It could be said that as long as their spiritual cavities were not completely opened, they would always be useful. Lu Yi had eaten a barrier-breaking fruit before, and it was all thanks to that fruit that he was able to break through to the spirit stream realm. Thus, when Yi mentioned it, his interest was piqued. The barrier-breaking fruit that Yi had given him last time was stolen from here. She was a spirit, and could come and go without a trace. Although the snake monster occupied this place, it was unable to guard against her. However, the environment here was extremely dangerous to her. If it weren't for the fact that she had no other choice, Yi wouldn't have taken the risk to come here. In the end, although she had obtained the fruit, Yi had been weakened for many days before recovering. She and Big Tiger already had some grudges with the snake monster. Previously, she hadn't been strong enough, so she hadn't been able to take revenge. Now that she had Lu Yi as her backer and was about to leave, Yi naturally wanted to take revenge. At the same time, she could also give Lu Yi 2 barrier-breaking fruits, which would deepen their friendship and strengthen their cooperative relationship. It could be said that she had killed 2 birds with 1 stone. The snake monster coiled its body, using its body as a cover to surround the barrier-breaking fruit. It raised its head high and breathed in and out, causing fiery red spiritual chi to flow into its mouth and nose. It looked like it was cultivating. 2 uninvited guests disturbed it. Following Big Tiger's roar, the snake monster suddenly raised its head and flicked its tongue. Big Tiger pounced forward like a gust of wind, but in the next moment, the snake monster shot out, opened its mouth, and bit down on Big Tiger's neck. Big Tiger roared in pain and also bit down on the snake's belly. However, their strengths weren't equal. Big Tiger was bitten until it was dripping with blood, but the snake monster was completely unharmed. Fiery red demonic energy pervaded the snake monster's body, forming a layer of protection that made it difficult for Big Tiger to bite through. In a single exchange, the awe-inspiring Big Tiger suffered a great loss. Moreover, the snake's body, which was several meters long, coiled around Big Tiger, trapping him like a dumpling. Instant kill. Although they were both demonic beasts, the difference in strength between them wasn't small. Fortunately, there was still Lu Yi. When Big Tiger pounced, he used Big Tiger's body as a cover to charge forward. At that moment, the 2 monsters were entangled in a fierce battle. It was a good opportunity to make a move. When Lu Yi unsheathed his saber, he activated his spiritual energy and added a sharpness mark to the blade. In an instant, a snow-white saber light flashed and blood splattered. Chapter 56. Passing by the two entangled vicious beasts, Lu Yi didn't even have time to stabilize himself before the red snake tail lashed out at him like a whip, causing a strong gust of wind to blow against his face. Unable to turn around at the moment, Lu Yi could only hurriedly urge his spiritual energy to protect his body. With a bang, he was sent flying. His shoulder blades ached as he rolled a few times on the scorching ground. Standing up, he looked up and was a little surprised. Even with his sharp blade, he couldn't cut the snake in half. He only managed to cut more than half of the snake's body. Blood flowed out, and the snake monster rolled on the ground in pain. Big Tiger took advantage of the situation to break free from its restraints and bravely rushed forward, biting at the snake's wound. It tore off a large piece of flesh. The snake raised its head high and opened its mouth. A red light was brewing in its mouth, aiming at Big Tiger's position. The temperature of the entire cave suddenly rose. Big Tiger's bestial instincts didn't let it sense that something was wrong. With a low roar, it rushed to the side. In the next moment, the snake spat out a flame, burning the air in front of it. Seeing this scene, the corner of Lu Ye's eyes twitched. He knew that this snake monster was much stronger than Big Tiger. Fortunately, Big Tiger had pulled the snake's aggro. Otherwise, he would have to use the golden body talisman to block the flames. Big Tiger dodged in time, and the flame didn't hurt it. Lu Yi took the opportunity to rush behind the snake monster and slashed at the snake's head. This slash only cut more than half of the snake's body. The blade was blocked by the snake's bones. After suffering a big loss twice at Lu Ye's hands, the snake immediately turned its head and aimed at Lu Yi, red light brewing in its mouth. Lu Yi didn't retreat. Instead, he stabbed his blade into the snake's mouth and fell back at the same time. At the same time, the long blade pierced through the snake's head and came out from the back. A snow-white figure rushed from the side and slammed into the snake, knocking it to the side. The flames from the snake's mouth lost its aim and burned in midair. Lu Yi, who had fallen to the ground, quickly got up and took out a talisman from his storage bag. Holding it in his hand, he fixed his eyes to the side and became alert. However, he quickly put away the talisman and waited quietly in place. His last stab had directly pierced through the snake's head. It could be said that it was a fatal wound. Although the big snake was twisting and rolling on the ground, it was obviously not going to survive. Moreover, the long sword was stuck in its mouth. As it twisted and turned, it caused more damage. The ground was full of snake blood that splattered everywhere. It was evaporated by the high temperature, making sizzling sounds. Big Tiger also got up and shook his body. His snow-white fur was in a mess and there were large scorched marks. He looked very miserable. From the moment De Hu launched his attack until now, it had only been a dozen breaths of time. Victory and defeat had already been decided, and life and death had already been decided. However, in this extremely short period of time, the battle between them was extremely dangerous. To Lu Ye's surprise, his first cooperation with De Hu was perfect. Especially at the very end, when Lu Yi had launched that fatal strike, his body had already fallen backwards in an attempt to avoid his opponent's flames. However, Big Tiger's charge had ensured Lu Ye's safety. Facing such a snake demon, Lu Yi inwardly speculated that if he were to come alone, it would definitely be a tough battle. He might even have to use a few talismans. However, with the cooperation of Big Tiger, it only took a short while to take it down. He suddenly felt that agreeing to Yi Yi's request before was not a bad thing. Well done. Lu Yi nodded to Big Tiger, not stingy with his praise. Big Tiger howled in response. Although this guy couldn't speak and wasn't very strong, after several encounters, Lu Yi found that it was extremely intelligent and could understand human speech. This was very good. The big snake finally stopped moving. Lu Yi stepped forward and kicked it to make sure it was dead. Looking at the long sword stuck in the snake's mouth, Lu Yi felt a little awkward. The sword had been burned red by the snake's flames. If he picked it up now, he was afraid he would lose a layer of skin. He could only wait for a while. Taking advantage of this, Lu Yi walked over to the barrier-breaking fruit tree and carefully picked the 2 barrier-breaking fruits and put them in his storage bag. As for the fruit tree, Lu Yi didn't plan to touch it. It wouldn't be able to grow it even if he took it away. Just as Lu Yi was about to put away the sword, his mind suddenly became absent-minded as if something was stirring in his body. This feeling reminded him of what happened a few months ago. He hurriedly said, "Hoopa, you go out first, I'll find you later." The tiger howled, raised its paw, and patted the dead snake. Lu Yi immediately understood, "Got it, this is good stuff, how could I leave it behind?" Only then did Big Tiger leave with satisfaction. Before it left, it picked up a piece of flesh that it had torn off from the snake's body. After Big Tiger's figure disappeared, Lu Yi looked at the barrier-breaking fruit tree again. The feeling of stirring came again. He quickly focused his mind, but to his surprise, there was no shadow of the talent tree in his field of vision this time. Instead, there was something strange in his source aperture. He hurriedly closed his eyes and carefully sensed. Vaguely, he seemed to see the shadow of a big tree appear in his source aperture. It was the talent tree. The talent tree's roots grew roots, just like the scene a few months ago in the Evil Moon Valley mine. The roots pierced into an inexplicable place, and the next moment, a fiery red power was drawn out from the roots. As the fiery red power poured in, he clearly saw a leaf on the talent tree begin to burst into flames, and then it burned fiercely. Then the second leaf, when it came to the third leaf, the leaf only burst into light, but it did not burn. The roots slowly disappeared. Lu Yi opened his eyes and found that his hand had unknowingly covered the barrier-breaking fruit tree. The fruit tree had completely withered, and the originally scorching hot cave had completely changed. There was no longer any scorching aura. Lu Yi fell into deep thought. He recalled the scene when the talent tree first changed. At that time, he was inspecting Manager Yang's relics and found an unknown ore. Then, the talent tree grew roots and pierced into the ore. As a result, the ore split open, and a ball of orange flame appeared inside. After the talent tree absorbed the power of the flame, a leaf bearing the sharpness spiritual mark burned fiercely. This time, it was even worse. The talent tree absorbed some kind of power, causing 2 leaves on the tree to burn, and the third leaf to show an obvious change. It seemed that his guess from a long time ago was right. The talent tree needed to absorb some flame or scorching power for it to change. The experience just now undoubtedly proved this point. The underground of this cave undoubtedly contained the energy needed by the talent tree. After it was absorbed by the talent tree, this place was no longer hot. And the barrier-breaking fruit tree's living environment was destroyed, so the fruit tree naturally died. It could even be said that there was some scorching power in the fruit tree, but after it was absorbed by the talent tree, how could it continue to live? Chapter 57. In the karst cave, Lu Yi closed his eyes again and calmed his mind. The innate skill tree was indeed in his source spiritual cavity. When he focused, he could see it. This was different from before. Before, when he was focused enough, the innate skill tree would appear in his field of vision, appearing as an illusory image. Perhaps, the innate skill tree was originally in his source spiritual cavity, but he hadn't been enlightened before, so what he saw was only an illusory image in his field of vision. After being enlightened, he could feel it more directly. After coming to the spirit stream battlefield, he had been busy improving his cultivation level and cultivating diligently, so he hadn't paid attention to the innate skill tree's situation. It was only when the innate skill tree absorbed external energy that he noticed the changes. This was a good thing. He had always had a doubt in his heart, and that was that there didn't seem to be any hidden dangers when he cultivated by taking pills. He guessed that it was related to the innate skill tree, but he didn't know what the specific relationship was. Now that he could directly feel the innate skill tree's existence, perhaps he could carefully study it when he had time. Lu Yi looked at the 2 burning leaves on the innate skill tree. Although he knew that the leaves were good things, he couldn't help but recall some unpleasant memories. Suppressing his desire to investigate, Lu Yi walked over to the snake monster's corpse and pulled out his weapon. Then, he cut the snake monster's body into a dozen pieces and put them into his storage bag. This snake monster was much stronger than Big Tiger, and it could even breathe fire. The snake monster's flesh was definitely rich in spiritual power, so eating it would be very nutritious. After finishing all this, Lu Yi looked around and made sure that he hadn't missed anything before walking out of the karst cave. More than an hour later, Lu Yi met up with Yi and Big Tiger, who were waiting at the entrance of the cave. Seeing that there was blood on Big Tiger's shoulder, he took out a healing pill and fed it to Big Tiger. This wound was caused by the snake monster's bite during the previous battle. Lu Yi was also slightly injured. It was also on his shoulder, where he had been whipped by the snake's tail, but it wasn't serious. After a short while, he rode on Big Tiger's back and reached out to stroke its soft fur, thinking back to the first time he met Big Tiger and Yi. At that time, who would have thought that such a majestic demonic beast would one day become his mount? It had to be said, riding on Big Tiger's back was a good experience. Lu Yi, a small cultivator at the 2nd layer of the spirit stream layer, couldn't help but feel a sense of heroism. The tiger's body was sturdy and its back was wide, so it was not uncomfortable to ride on it. Where are we going? Yi sat cross-legged on Big Tiger's head and turned to ask. Lu Yi felt the guidance of the war imprint on the back of his hand and pointed in a direction. Follow this way, walk along the foot of the mountain. Then let's go. Yi waved her small hand, clearly in a very happy mood. The Big Tiger let out a low roar, and its snow-white figure shot out like an arrow. On this day, many low-level cultivators who were preparing to enter the Azure Cloud Mountain for training saw the figure of a young man riding on a big snow-white tiger. The water droplets fell into the sea, creating tiny ripples. However, those ripples would eventually create monstrous waves. Night fell. At the bottom of a protruding cliff, there was a concave area at the bottom of the cliff. It was a natural shelter. Yi, who had gone ahead to scout the situation, waved her hand. Lu Yi, over here. Under the moonlight, Lu Yi walked over with a majestic gait, step by step. Yi couldn't bear to look at Lu Ye's strange walking posture, but in the end, she couldn't help but laugh out loud. Lu Yi walked past her and glared at her fiercely. He thought that riding on Big Tiger would be a very pleasant thing, but on the first day, he discovered that he was naive. The main reason was that the sides of his thighs were a little unbearable. Lu Yi was sure that his inner thighs were now covered in blood, and even now, he could still feel the bumpy feeling of riding on Big Tiger's back. Along the way, not to mention riding on Big Tiger's back to cultivate, it was already good enough that he didn't faint from the bumpy ride. You'll get used to it. Yi followed behind him and said. Walking into the natural depression, Lu Yi nodded. It was a good place to rest. There were traces of a bonfire in the depression, which seemed to have been left behind by the previous travelers. Lu Yi rested for a moment, then got up to find some firewood to light. He took out a section of snake body, skinned it, and cut off about 5 kilograms of snake meat. As for the rest, he threw it all to Big Tiger. Big Tiger hugged the dozens of kilograms of snake meat and ate heartily, enjoying it very much. The flames lingered, and the fragrance gradually spread. Hot oil dripped onto the flames, making sizzling sounds. Lu Yi roasted the snake meat while taking out a barrier-breaking fruit from his storage bag and gestured to Yi. Yi looked at him in confusion. 2 fruits, 1 for 5, Lu Yi explained. Yi shook her head and said, this thing is useful to you. Hoopa and I have no use for it, so you can keep it for yourself. Lu Yi thought for a moment and said, Hoopa eats spirit pills. Yi nodded. He eats spirit stones too. Lu Yi was shocked. Spirit stones can be eaten? Yi explained, spirit stones are the condensation of spiritual energy. Demonic beasts can eat them, but humans can't eat them. They can't be refined. Lu Yi expressed that he had learned something new. No wonder when Yi and Big Tiger came to rob him, they didn't get any spirit pills and started asking for spirit stones instead. Then I'll convert your fruits into spirit pills. Lu Yi was a little embarrassed. But I don't know how much these fruits are worth. Yi pursed her lips and smiled. You can give whatever you want. Hoopa can eat 2 spirit pills a day now. It's not a lot. The snake meat was soon roasted. Lu Yi sprinkled some salt on it to taste, then began to eat. He suddenly raised his head and looked at Yi, who was looking at him eagerly, and handed the snake meat in his hand to her. Do you want some? Yi shook her head. I can't eat. Lu Yi continued to eat. The snake meat was indeed very nutritious. After eating a few kilograms of snake meat, Lu Yi felt warm all over and was full of energy. Even the flow of spiritual energy in his body seemed to have become faster. While refining spiritual energy into qi, he took out his saber and walked to an open space on the side. He took off his shirt, revealing his strong upper body, and began to seriously hack with his saber. The previous battle with the fair-skinned cultivator made him realize that his fighting skills were a mess. He could take spirit pills to improve his cultivation, but they were useless in terms of fighting skills. Moreover, there was no one to guide him at the moment, so Lu Yi thought of a stupid method, which was to constantly hack with his saber. He didn't know if it would be effective, but it was the only method he could think of. In the future, he was destined to encounter stronger and stronger enemies. In close combat, cultivation strength and fighting skills were indispensable. Under the moonlight, the young man seriously hacked with his saber, sweating profusely. Not far away, the big white tiger was lying on the ground, snoring. A white light lingered on its body. The girl with black hair draped over her shoulders hugged her knees and quietly watched. With the full moon hanging high in the sky as the background, the scene was hazy. Chapter 58. 2 hours later, Lu Yi put away his blade and walked to a dark place. He took out his water sack, washed it a little, put on his clothes, and returned to the bottom of the cliff. Big Tiger had already fallen asleep, snoring loudly. Yi was still sitting there, probably waiting for him. However, when she saw Lu Ye's expression, she felt a little strange. That was because Lu Yi seemed to have made a difficult decision at this moment, and had an expression that said, even if there are tens of millions of people here, I will still press on. She couldn't help but tilt her head. Lu Yi sat down cross-legged with a knot in his stomach. After thinking for a while, he told Yi, if I faint later, don't worry too much. Huh? Yi was puzzled. Lu Yi didn't explain too much. He closed his eyes, immersed his mind, and once again, saw, the talent tree entrenched in his source aperture. On the huge crown of the tree, 3 leaves were burning fiercely. The 4th had already bloomed, but it didn't burn. In the mine of the evil Moon Valley, his talent tree's first burning leaf carried a kind of sharp spirit pattern. Without the sharp spirit pattern, he wouldn't have been able to kill the seriously injured Zhou Cheng so easily. He wouldn't have been able to pierce through the protective spiritual energy of the fair-skinned man, and he wouldn't have been able to severely injure the snake demon and finally win. It could be said that this spirit pattern had been of great help to Lu Yi at several critical moments. Now that 2 more leaves on the talent tree were burning, he was looking forward to what kind of spirit pattern he would get. Slowly focusing his attention, Lu Yi looked at one of the burning leaves. Just like the last time, the small leaf quickly enlarged, and in the blink of an eye, it filled all his vision and thoughts. At the same time, a large amount of information uncontrollably poured into his mind, and Lu Yi once again had the feeling that someone had smashed his head with a hammer. Last time, he directly fainted. This time, although he felt the world was spinning and the pain was unbearable, he didn't faint. Lu Yi would rather faint because the whole process gave him a feeling that death was better than living. It was as if someone had opened his brain, forcibly stuffed something he didn't understand into it, and stirred it up. He suddenly opened his eyes, and a suppressed growl came from his throat. His eyes were blood red. Who had been paying attention to him, was shocked. Even the big tiger, who was in deep sleep, was awakened. It roared and looked around vigilantly, mistakenly thinking that it had been ambushed. After a while, Lu Yi gradually calmed down. His vision was blood red and his whole body was drenched in sweat. Yi and De Hu stood aside in panic, not knowing what to do. In fact, Lu Ye's current appearance was extremely ferocious. Not only were his eyes bloodshot, but his temples were also bulging with blue veins, as if he was enduring great torture. After panting heavily for a moment, Lu Yi recovered a little and said to the nervous big tiger and Yi, "It's okay now." He closed his eyes again. The pain had passed, and it was time to reap the fruits of victory. Yi and Big Tiger looked at each other, both confused. But this matter seemed to be related to Lu Ye's cultivation. If he didn't say anything, Yi couldn't ask, so she could only stand aside with Big Tiger. At this moment, Lu Yi was investigating the characteristics of the second spirit pattern. Defend. This was the name of the second spiritual inscription. Judging from its name, it should be a defensive spiritual inscription. Previously, Lu Yi had some guesses that the first spiritual inscription was on the offensive side, so perhaps the second one would be on the defensive side. Now, it seemed that this was indeed the case. He opened his eyes and prepared for a moment. Suddenly, a layer of spirit light visible to the naked eye flashed on his palm. The spirit light turned into the shape of a triangular shield, engraved with complicated patterns. This is a spiritual inscription. Yi, who had been silently paying attention to Lu Yi, was shocked. Although she had lost a lot of memories, she still remembered some common knowledge of the cultivation world and knew more than Lu Yi. So at first glance, when she saw Lu Yi use his own spirit power to construct a spiritual inscription, it was simply unbelievable. It should be known that low-level cultivators like Lu Yi generally focused on improving their cultivation. They didn't even have time to study spells, let alone complex spiritual inscriptions. Of course, some spells could also be regarded as the manifestation of spiritual inscriptions. It could even be said that the spiritual inscription that Lu Yi was activating now could be regarded as a defensive spell. Spells and spiritual inscriptions were closely related. Many times, they were similar but not completely the same. It was difficult to explain in a few words. But in any case, it was still unbelievable that a low-level cultivator could construct a spiritual inscription. Yi was more and more certain that Lu Yi was a disciple of a top sect, and his status in that sect was definitely not low. Perhaps he was the illegitimate son of a sect master. Because of some unavoidable reason, he could only come out alone to gain experience. In just a few breaths of time, she had already imagined a drama full of love and hatred. Lu Yi didn't pay attention to Yi's gaze. At this moment, he was feeling the sturdiness of the spiritual inscription. Purely in terms of defensive power, the spiritual inscription's defensive power completely surpassed his protective spirit power. Comparing the two, the difference in defensive power was at least several times. This meant that if he encountered any attacks in the future, he would have a better defensive method. However, although the defensive power was outstanding, the consumption was not low. This palm-sized spiritual inscription consumed the spirit power reserve of one of Lu Ye's spirit cavities. The consumption was even greater than the sharpness. In other words, if Lu Yi activated this spiritual inscription 20 times in a row, his spirit power would be exhausted. Moreover, if the defensive range was expanded, the consumption would increase. Lu Yi was only activating a palm-sized spiritual inscription, but it didn't mean that the spiritual inscription was only this big. If he wanted to, he could activate a bigger one. In short, this was a pretty good spiritual inscription. Although he had something like the golden body talisman, there would be a time when the talisman would be exhausted. However, this spiritual inscription was his own ability. Moreover, in comparison, activating a spirit talisman only required a single thought. But activating a spirit talisman was much more troublesome. First, one had to take out a spirit talisman from their storage bag and pour their spirit energy into it. In the midst of an intense battle, there was often no time for Lu Yi to do such things. If he had such a spiritual inscription before meeting the fair-skinned man, he could have withstood his opponent's attack and killed him head-on. Although this spiritual inscription couldn't increase Lu Ye's cultivation, it greatly increased his fighting strength. There was still one more. Lu Yi thought of the previous feeling and shuddered. He didn't plan to investigate the other spiritual inscription, at least not for the next 2 days. His mind was a mess. If he investigated the spiritual inscription again, he might die. Therefore, he had to rest for a few days. Taking out a Yun spirit pill and swallowing it, Lu Yi was ready to investigate the question that had always puzzled him. Was it related to the talent tree that he didn't have any hidden dangers after taking pills? Calmly sensing, he soon saw the talent tree hidden in the source cavities. Chapter 59. When Lu Yi didn't deliberately investigate, he didn't feel anything, but when he did, he could clearly perceive the existence of the talent tree. This mystical tree had taken root in his source aperture. The power of the spirit accumulation pill dissolved in his abdomen and transformed into spiritual power. Lu Yi divided his attention to guide the pill power into the spirit aperture while paying attention to the talent tree. The spiritual power obtained from the pill power didn't directly enter a certain spirit aperture, but first passed through the source aperture. For example, Lu Ye's 21 spirit apertures were not yet full, so the spiritual power he obtained from the spirit pill had to first pass through the source aperture before entering the 21 spirit aperture. If a spirit aperture was too far away from the source aperture, it would even need to pass through several spirit apertures. But without exception, the source aperture was the starting point for receiving spiritual power, so the first spirit aperture to open was called the source aperture, and was also the most important spirit aperture for cultivators. According to Lu Ye's understanding, the source aperture was similar to the dantian of those martial arts masters. But then again, the location of the source aperture was indeed in the dantian, and the spirit apertures opened by low-level cultivation methods were all near the source aperture, so there wasn't much need for a transfer, just passing through the source aperture was enough. Lu Yi didn't check it carefully before, but this time, he was surprised to find that the spiritual power transformed from the Yun spirit pill didn't seem to be as pure as his own spiritual power. The spiritual power was vaguely mixed with something indescribable, and those things should be harmful to him. Is this pill poison? Lu Yi thought in his mind. The head teacher had told him before that every medicine was 30% poisonous, not to mention the spirit pills that cultivators took. The lower the quality of the spirit pill, the stronger the pill poison. Therefore, cultivators had to find a way to dissolve the pill poison after taking a spirit pill, otherwise it would leave behind some hidden dangers. The spiritual power that wasn't pure flowed into the source aperture, and through the source aperture, flowed into the 21 spirit aperture, but a miraculous thing happened. The spiritual power that flowed into the 21 spirit aperture didn't have the slightest residue of pill poison, becoming as pure as the spiritual power in the other spirit apertures. Lu Yi was keenly aware of this, and thus determined that the spiritual power's change appeared in the source aperture. He hurriedly put most of his attention into the source aperture, carefully observing it, and soon found the mystery. The innate skill tree that had taken root in the source spirit aperture grew roots, seemingly absorbing the spiritual energy in the source spirit aperture. Through the flow of the innate skill tree, the spiritual energy that wasn't considered pure became pure after going through this process. Throughout the entire process, the talent tree's body was constantly emitting a gray aura, as if it was burning ashes. Sure enough, the talent tree. The spirit talent tree, the talent tree's estes apert, st, s, estes s estes, its t, s have t estes est feel, s heses. SSSS. On the contrary, there was a period of time when he didn't have the Yun spirit pill, so this phenomenon didn't occur when he cultivated essence into qi. Putting everything together, Lu Yi came to a realization. The talent tree had the ability to purify spiritual energy, and the pill toxins from his cultivation were all burned away by the talent tree. Therefore, there were no hidden dangers from his cultivation. The burning pill toxins would not disappear for no reason and would be expelled from his body. This caused him to feel like his body was covered in dust every time he cultivated. Everything was clear now. Lu Ye's previous conjecture was confirmed, so he wasn't too surprised. However, after figuring this out, he wouldn't have too much psychological pressure to take pills and cultivate in the future. Relaxing his mind, Lu Yi continued to guide the pill energy in his abdomen. The spiritual energy in his 21 acupoints gradually increased. Yi was originally watching him anxiously, but when she saw that he was not acting strangely, she could not help but fall asleep. God knew how a spirit like her could sleep. She was awakened by the sound of something breaking through the air. When she opened her eyes, the sky was already bright, and the bonfire beside her had already burned out. Not far away, Lu Yi was bare-chested, holding a saber in one hand, constantly slashing. Every movement was not fast, but his expression was meticulous. Was this guy made of iron? The corner of Yi's eye twitched. In fact, Lu Yi had slept for 3 hours last night. Although a cultivator's physique was stronger than a mortal's, they still needed to rest, especially a low-level cultivator like him who had not completely broken away from the category of mortals. However, he knew that the road ahead was full of obstacles, so he did not want to waste time. When Lu Yi finished cultivating, Yi and Big Tiger had already collected enough firewood to light the fire. Lu Yi took out a section of snake body from his storage bag and threw it to them to deal with. After eating and drinking to their fill, the group continued on their journey. The journey was not as good as imagined. Along the bumpy journey, Lu Yi swallowed a spirit accumulation pill. He wanted to try cultivating on Big Tiger's back. If this problem was not solved, he would waste a lot of time. Along the way, they occasionally encountered some hurried low-level cultivators, but Big Tiger avoided them in advance. When those cultivators saw Big Tiger's figure from afar, as long as they were not crazy in the head, they would not provoke him. Moreover, they might not be able to catch up. At night, they found a suitable place to rest as usual. Eating snake meat, practicing the saber, and then taking pills to cultivate. Today's progress was good. Although Lu Yi still felt that Big Tiger's back was bumpy, at least he could start cultivating. It was just that the efficiency was a bit low. At dawn, Lu Yi took out the 10-point map and compared his current position with the starting position to determine the direction and the nearest destination. After riding Big Tiger for 2 days, he still did not get out of the range of Green Cloud Mountain, which showed how vast this mountain range was. Another day later, in the evening, Lu Yi looked at a market not far away and took a long breath. He had arrived at the nearest destination. On the 10-point map, this place was marked as Green Cloud Market 5. Lu Yi rode Big Tiger into the market, attracting a lot of attention. He had seen cultivators with demonic beasts when he was in Green Cloud Market 5 before, but those demonic beasts were all flying sand and stones. They were not as handsome as Big Tiger. Lu Yi also considered letting Big Tiger wait for him outside, but Big Tiger's strength was not very high. Moreover, it was not familiar with this place. If it accidentally entered the territory of a demonic beast, it might be at a disadvantage. After thinking about it, he simply brought Big Tiger with him. He wanted to rest here for the night. It had to be said that the tiger's presence was very intimidating. Many timid cultivators avoided Lu Yi from afar. Less than an hour later, Lu Yi arrived at the Tianji Business Union in this market. He did not have any spirit stones, but the business union also accepted spirit pills as payment. Therefore, after Lu Yi paid a spirit pill, he was led to a guest room on the 3rd floor. The room was not too big, but it was quiet. Big Tiger was resting on the floor. Lu Yi fed it a spirit pill, and Yi, who had been holding back for a long time, ran out to get some fresh air. Lu Yi sat cross-legged on the bed, guiding the energy of the pill to attack the spiritual aperture barrier of the 22 apertures. Chapter 60. During the day, Lu Yi had already cultivated 21 apertures to the brim. As long as he could break through 22 apertures, he would be one step closer to the third-order spirit stream realm. He didn't take the barrier-breaking fruit, even though it had a miraculous effect on breaking through the barriers of his spirit apertures. According to Lu Ye's estimation, the barrier-breaking fruit should be very precious. The last time he took it, he was in a hurry to break through to the first-order spirit stream realm. Now that he had enough profound spirit pills, he only needed to spend a little more time to achieve the same goal. Naturally, Lu Yi wouldn't waste them. He wanted to keep these 2 spirit fruits and wait for the right time to take them so that they could play the greatest role. Now that the spirit energy in his body was incomparable to before, it made it easier for him to break through the barriers of his spirit apertures. In less than an hour, the barriers of his 22 apertures were broken and a trickle of spirit energy flowed into them. Lu Yi cultivated for a while and completely digested the pill's energy before stopping. It had been 3 days since the last time he checked the spirit mark leaf on his talent tree. Lu Yi was preparing to check the 3rd burning leaf tonight to see what kind of spirit mark it carried. Although he was mentally prepared, when he was about to do so, he still felt a little apprehensive, mainly because the experience was too unpleasant. But this kind of thing had to be experienced sooner or later. It was better to have a short pain than a long pain. Lu Yi made up his mind and focused his mind, looking at the talent tree in his source spirit aperture. The burning leaf rapidly enlarged, and the mysterious patterns on the leaf instantly obscured Lu Ye's vision and thoughts. The feeling of being smashed by a hammer came again. His mind was pried open, and a large amount of inexplicable information poured into it, and then it was stirred up. After a long time, Lu Yi opened his eyes while gasping for breath. Beside him, Big Tiger raised his head and Yi stood by the bed, looking at him worriedly. Fortunately, Yi had experienced this 3 days ago, so she wasn't surprised. Lu Yi immersed his mind and checked the additional information in his mind. Spirit gathering. This was the name of the spirit mark on the 3rd leaf. The first spirit mark was an offensive one, the second was a defensive one, and the 3rd was an auxiliary one. The function of this spiritual tattoo was obvious just from its name. It was used to gather spiritual energy. Lu Yi circulated his spiritual energy and formed this spiritual tattoo on his palm. When the complex spiritual tattoo appeared, the spiritual energy in the room gathered towards his palm, which then attracted the spiritual energy from outside to pour in. Lu Yi waited for a moment and realized that the heaven and earth spirit qi in the room didn't seem to have changed much. Perhaps it was because the spirit pattern he had constructed wasn't big enough and couldn't last long enough. If he could construct a spiritual tattoo that could cover the entire room or even the entire Merchant Alliance, the effect of gathering the spiritual energy of heaven and earth would be outstanding. However, not to mention whether his spiritual power could support such a huge spiritual pattern, even if he did, it would be meaningless. His body wasn't able to take in and exhale spirit qi very well, so no matter how rich the spirit qi in the outside world was, it wasn't of much use to him. Trash. Lu Yi cursed in his heart, feeling a little disappointed. Whether it was sharpness or defense, they could provide him with great help in battle. He was looking forward to this 3rd spiritual tattoo, but it turned out to be such a useless one. However, compared to sharpness and defense, the consumption of spirit gathering was very small. For a spiritual tattoo of the same size, the consumption of spirit gathering was only 10% of that of defense. Moreover, it seemed that it could be maintained for a long time. Whether it was sharpness or defense, the duration was very short, so if Lu Yi wanted to use them in battle, he had to grasp the right timing. It was fine to maintain them for a long time, but the consumption of spiritual power would increase. However, spirit gathering was different. While gathering the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, it was also replenishing itself. Therefore, once it was constructed, unless Lu Yi took the initiative to disperse it, it would continue to be used. Thinking about it this way, this thing wasn't completely useless. If he constructed a large enough spirit-gathering mark in a sect's encampment, the spiritual energy of heaven and earth in the encampment would become denser and denser. Yi stared at this scene in shock. 3 days ago, she had seen Lu Yi casually construct an indescribable spiritual tattoo. Tonight, she saw it again, and these two were completely different. Yi wasn't sure what the spiritual tattoo 3 days ago was used for, but this time, the spiritual tattoo clearly had the use of gathering spiritual energy of heaven and earth. Who exactly was this guy? His cultivation wasn't high, but his research on spiritual tattoos was so thorough. One had to know that it would take a lot of time and energy. It seemed that he was really related to some big shot from a big sect. It had to be said that the more Yi thought about it, the more she thought about it. She was smart and pretended not to see things that she shouldn't ask. This made Lu Yi feel very gratified. Otherwise, he would have to consider whether to continue their partnership. On the other side, Lu Yi had already dispersed the spirit-gathering mark. He took off his shirt and took out a long saber to hack. Big Tiger had no choice but to hide in a corner to avoid being accidentally injured. One saber, Lu Yi hacked seriously. The night passed, and at dawn, Lu Yi came from the 3rd floor to the main hall of the 1st floor. He found a manager of the merchant union and made a transaction with him for 2 pieces of yuan magnetic Oregon. He still had 14 pieces of yuan magnetic ore in his hand, all of which were relatively large. The largest one was the size of a wash basin. He didn't trade too much, so as not to meet people like Lu Rian again. Anyway, he would encounter many sub-unions of the Heavenly Secret Business Union along the way. Selling the ores in his hand would reduce the risk. When he left the 3rd floor of Green Cloud Market, if he wasn't in a hurry to buy a 10-point map, he wouldn't have taken the risk to sell more than 10 pieces of yuan magnetic Oregon. It would be easy to be targeted. 2 pieces of yuan magnetic ore were worth 103 spirit stones. This time, he didn't buy any more spirit accumulation pills, but saved the spirit stones. For the time being, the spirit accumulation pills were enough for him to use until he reached the 3rd order spirit stream realm, so there was no need to continue saving. As for saving spirit stones, it was because he wanted to save a large number of spirit stones for other purposes. As soon as he walked out of the Heavenly Secret Business Union, a male cultivator with a protruding mouth and monkey-like cheeks greeted him with a smile. "Greetings, fellow Taoist." Lu Yi frowned at him, and De Hu beside him took a step forward and growled threateningly. The male cultivator's smile suddenly froze, and he took 2 steps back. "Please calm down, fellow Taoist. This one has no evil intentions, but I have a business deal to discuss with fellow Taoist." Lu Yi looked at the aura of the other party and confirmed that he was only a 2nd order spirit stream realm cultivator. Moreover, the purity of his aura was below average. It was obvious that this guy's strength wasn't that great. Seeing Lu Yi and De Hu staring at him together, the male cultivator's scalp went numb. He forced a smile and said, "It's really just a business deal." "Out of the way," Lu Yi said faintly. He put his hand on the hilt of the saber at his waist and led De Hu straight forward. The man hurriedly moved out of the way, but he didn't give up. He probably thought that Lu Yi couldn't do anything to him here, so he chased after Lu Yi and said, "Fellow Taoist, I have a set of secret arts that can assist in cultivation. If you use it, the efficiency of your cultivation will at least double. It's perfect for fellow Taoists' cultivation. Would you be interested?" Chapter 61. An auxiliary cultivation technique that could double the efficiency. This was obviously bullshit. If there really was such a cultivation technique, it would definitely be a secret manual that would never be divulged to outsiders. Even those top sects would treat it as a treasure, and its value was extremely high. Why would they need to go around peddling it? Lu Yi looked at this male cultivator and knew that he did not come here specifically to find him. Instead, he was waiting outside the merchant union and randomly chose a target. He just happened to be seen by him. Not interested. Lu Yi did not intend to be entangled with him. However, the man did not give up and continued to introduce the wonders of the cultivation technique to Lu Yi. He said that it was easy to cultivate, had strong compatibility with various low-level cultivation techniques, and that anyone could easily learn it. He even said with a solemn expression, "If fellow Taoist does not believe me, I can swear to the heavens that every word I say is true and will not deceive fellow Taoist." Lu Yi stopped and looked at him with a frown. He had sworn to the heavens before, so he knew that this kind of oath with the heavens as witness was not a joke. He could not help but feel a little doubtful. Was there really such a powerful cultivation technique in this world? What kind of concept was it to triple a person's cultivation efficiency? Seeing that Lu Yi was tempted, the male cultivator gestured with his hand and said, "There are too many people here, so it's inconvenient to say too much. Fellow Taoist, this way please." Lu Yi thought for a moment and followed the man to a place with fewer people. "Swear." Lu Yi went straight to the point. The man swallowed the words that were about to come out of his mouth and laughed. "All right, but fellow Taoist, if I swear, you can't not buy it. If the price is right, I will naturally buy it." The male cultivator nodded and said with a serious expression, "Itinerant cultivator Chen, he respectfully asks the heavens to bear witness that every word I say is true. If there is even half a lie, may I be tortured to death." An invisible force descended from the heavens and landed on the back of the male cultivator's hand. That was clearly where his battle imprint was. Lu Ye's expression was cold. This guy was really going all out in order to sell that cultivation technique. He even dared to swear such a vicious oath. "Show me," Lu Yi said. Chen He shook his head. "Fellow Taoist, you must be joking. That cultivation technique is simple and clear. If fellow Taoist sees it, you will immediately remember it in your heart. Why would you need to buy it? How much?" 30 spirit stones. Chen He quoted. Lu Yi turned around and left. Although he didn't know what was going on with that cultivation technique, and Chen He was even willing to take a heavenly mystery oath, he was sure that there was definitely something fishy about this cultivation technique. Otherwise, not to mention 30 spirit stones, even if it was 3,000 spirit stones, it would still be sold. Fellow Taoist, please wait a moment. When it comes to business, you have to raise the price and return the money when it comes down. If you don't try to return the price, how can you just turn around and leave like that? As a person, you have to be a little honest. Chen He hurriedly pulled Lu Yi back, earnestly persuading him. 3 pieces. Lu Yi followed the good advice and tried to make a counteroffer. Deal. Chen He took out a jade slip and slapped it on Lu Ye's palm. Lu Ye's eyes twitched. "Fellow Taoist, I've made a heavenly secret oath. Just now, you said that I'll buy it if the price is right. You're the one who set the price yourself. Fellow Taoist, you can't go back on your word, right?" Lu Yi was speechless. In the end, he took out 3 spirit stones and handed them to Chen He. After receiving the spirit stones, Chen He left happily. Holding the jade slip, Lu Yi didn't even have time to look at its contents before a person walked over with a chuckle and teased, "Got cheated?" Lu Yi raised his eyes to look at the other party. The person shrugged and said, "I was also cheated by him. That cultivation technique is completely useless." Lu Yi understood, "You were watching just now." The person smiled and said, "2 people being unlucky is better than me being unlucky alone, don't you think so? I feel much better now." He even winked at Lu Yi. Lu Yi said indifferently, "If I were you, I would compete with him for business. If he can sell that cultivation technique, why can't you sell it? Instead of watching others get cheated, it's better to swindle some spirit stones yourself. Who knows, you might be able to make a fortune." The person fell into deep thought after hearing Lu Ye's words. After a while, he slapped his thigh and said, "That makes sense." When he looked up, Lu Ye's figure was already gone. Outside the market square, Lu Yi rode on the big tiger's back and left, too lazy to pay attention to the scheming of those unscrupulous merchants. Although he was sure that he had really been cheated, fortunately, he didn't spend too many spirit stones, only 3. He had just traded more than 100 spirit stones from the merchant union, so he didn't care too much about it. However, that Chen he had even sworn a heavenly secret oath, which meant that the cultivation technique was really, as he said, able to increase the efficiency of cultivation. Otherwise, he would have already been swallowed by the oath. What was going on? Lu Yi became suspicious and began to investigate the name of the cultivation technique. Gluttonous meal was the name of the cultivation technique. Moreover, it was a cultivation technique that was difficult to determine its rank because the entire cultivation technique path included only 15 spirit apertures. One had to know that the golden cicada carefree technique that Lu Yi cultivated was already the lowest level of yellow grade cultivation technique, which could open 27 spirit apertures. This gluttonous meal only had 15 spirit apertures, which couldn't even compare to a yellow grade cultivation technique. However, considering that this wasn't a cultivation technique, but a supplementary one, it was understandable. Just as Chen he had said before, the cultivation technique path was clear at a glance and extremely simple. Because the number of spirit apertures included was very small, and the spirit apertures were distributed near the lower abdomen, it had a very strong compatibility with all low-level cultivation techniques. The compatibility between two cultivation techniques depended on how many spirit apertures there were in the cultivation technique path. The more the spirit apertures were repeated, the higher the compatibility. All low-level cultivation techniques would open spirit apertures near the lower abdomen because the source of the spirit aperture was there. Many low-level cultivation techniques would open spirit apertures that were almost exactly the same. It was only because the cultivation path was different that there were differences in the characteristics of the cultivation techniques. If the same 9 spirit apertures were connected in a different order, the speed at which spirit energy flowed through them would be different, which would then affect a cultivator's strength. Therefore, the order of connection between spirit apertures was a very strict matter. The 15 spirit apertures of this gluttonous meal cultivation technique were basically the same as the 27 spirit apertures of the golden cicada carefree technique. There were only 2 spirit apertures that weren't included in the golden cicada carefree technique. In other words, if Lu Yi finished cultivating the golden cicada carefree technique and opened the other 2 spirit apertures, he would be able to see the secret of the gluttonous meal. However, he wasn't in a hurry. He would wait until he finished cultivating the golden cicada carefree technique and see if this gluttonous meal was really that miraculous and could double his cultivation efficiency. After putting away the jade slip, Lu Yi took out a map and compared it to the distance between the 3rd and 5th points of the green cloud market, calculating the time he would need to spend. Then, he looked at the route he had planned for the jade blood sect. After a little calculation, Lu Yi couldn't help but sigh. At this speed, even if he didn't encounter any delays on the way, it would take him a very long time to return to the Jade Blood sect. If he encountered any delays, it would take even longer. The road ahead was long. Fortunately, Lu Yi wasn't alone. At the very least, he had Yi and Big Tiger accompanying him. Chapter 62. Half a month later, a travel-worn Lu Yi appeared in front of a canyon. Compared to the previous time when he was riding Big Tiger, he was undoubtedly much more relaxed now. When he rode Big Tiger on the first day, he was jolted to the point of almost falling apart, and his inner thighs were badly bruised. It was impossible for him to cultivate in that state. Today, he had completed his initial plan, which was to consume pills and cultivate while riding Big Tiger. Although the efficiency was not as good as normal, it was better than wasting time. After half a month, he had opened 3 more spirit apertures. Now, he was a cultivator with 25 apertures opened, only 2 more away from the 3rd-order spirit stream realm. At this rate, he would be able to cultivate the golden cicada's unfettered chant to perfection in another 6 or 7 days. Not only had his strength grown, but Big Tiger had also become stronger. The snake meat in the storage bag had been divided between him and Big Tiger, and 80% of it had gone into Big Tiger's stomach. The snake meat was of great benefit to a monster beast like Big Tiger, not to mention that Lu Yi also gave it 2 spirit accumulation pills every day. In just half a month, Big Tiger's body seemed to have increased in size, becoming more majestic. Lu Yi had no way to judge Big Tiger's current strength, but he estimated that even if he fought with Big Tiger without the help of spirit runes and spirit talismans, he would not have any advantage. Yi was Big Tiger's puppet spirit, so when Big Tiger became stronger, she would also become stronger. Therefore, although the average strength of the group of 1 person, 1 tiger, and 1 spirit was not very high, if they worked together, the power they could exert could not be underestimated. This increased Lu Ye's capital to travel in the spirit stream battlefield, and he increasingly felt that it was a wise decision to bring Big Tiger and Yi. Along the way, Lu Yi passed by a neutral market. In that market, Lu Yi cultivated for a night and sold 2 pieces of yuan magnetic ore for some spirit stones. Now, he had more than 200 spirit stones in his hand. Just a little bit more, and he should have enough by the time he reached the next sub-union of the Heavenly Secret Commerce Union. Jumping off Big Tiger's back, Lu Yi looked at the canyon in front of him and took out a map to compare. This was a place called the Sky-Splitting Gorge. The terrain was steep, and the cliffs on both sides were thousands of feet tall. From the map, the left side of the Sky-Splitting Gorge was the encampment of a sect called the Joshing sect, which belonged to the Wanmo Ridge. On the right side was the encampment of the Xian sect, which belonged to the Haotian Alliance. The Heaven-Splitting Gorge was located in the middle of the encampment of the 2 sects, and it was slightly closer to the 9 Stars sect. The ranks of the 2 sects were not high, Xian Men 9th rank and 9 Stars 8th rank. This kind of rank was normal in the outer circle of the battlefield. Moreover, the route that Lu Yi planned was an arc, almost close to the edge of the battlefield. So along the way, although they passed through the encampment of several sects, they were all 8th and 9th rank. He would not rashly enter the station of a higher grade sect, even if that sect belonged to Grand Heaven Alliance. Before entering the Spirit Stream battlefield, the last words of the sect master were still ringing in his ears. He did not dare to casually reveal his identity as a disciple of the Blue Blood sect, even if he did not know what the consequences would be. It was getting late, and Lu Yi didn't plan to enter the canyon now. After a day's journey, it wouldn't be too late to rest for a night and go tomorrow. Yi. Lu Yi called out. Got it. Yi's voice rang out. Then, she floated down from De Hu's head and floated off into the distance. She was going to investigate their surroundings. After interacting with each other for a few days, they had formed a tacit understanding. Every time they rested, Yi would be responsible for investigating their surroundings, in case there were any hidden dangers. She was a spiritual body, so she could come and go without a trace, making it very convenient for her to do this. There were a few times when some hidden dangers were avoided in advance because of her. However, she and De Hu were companions, so there was no way for her to be too far away from De Hu. According to Yi, there was no problem for her to be within 10 kilometers of De Hu. But once she was 10 kilometers away from De Hu, she would rapidly weaken. If she maintained this state for too long, it was very likely that she would dissipate. Lu Yi began to look for a suitable place to stay for the night. After wandering outside for more than half a month, he was already familiar with this place. A suitable place to stay for the night must first be easy to advance and retreat, and second, it must be hidden enough to shelter him from the wind and rain. After searching for a while, Lu Yi brought De Hu to a rocky area. Although this location wasn't good enough, there was no better place nearby. Looking at today's weather, it didn't look like it was going to rain, so there was no harm in making do for the night. Lu Yi took out the firewood he had prepared in advance from his storage bag and lit it. Then, he took out a large piece of beast meat and barbecued it over the fire. He then took out a bigger piece and threw it to De Hu. De Hu rushed to the side and wolfed it down. Looking at De Hu's ferocious eating face, Lu Yi was a little worried. He thought that the Yun spirit pills he had saved before would be enough for him to use until he reached the third-order spirit stream realm, but now it seemed that it was barely enough. De Hu consumed 2 yun spirit pills a day, and he needed 11 or 12 to open one aperture. Now, he only had 30 or so yun spirit pills on hand. By the time he opened 27 apertures, these yun spirit pills would probably be exhausted. Moreover, he had a faint feeling that as De Hu's strength improved, the consumption of yun spirit pills would increase. It was worrying. However, this was also the price he had to pay for bringing De Hu and Yi on the road. At the very least, he could still cultivate while he was on the road, saving a lot of time. For a low-level cultivator like him, the time he had to cultivate in the early stages was precious. The beast meat barbecued on the bonfire dripped with oil, making a sizzling sound. De Hu, who was eating raw meat, suddenly looked up in a direction and let out a low growl. Immediately, he rushed out and rushed in that direction. Lu Yi was stunned for a moment, but then he reacted. Something had happened to Yi. Yi was a nightmare spirit transformed from De Hu, so they had an extremely close connection. Therefore, if anything happened to Yi, De Hu would be able to feel it. De Hu's speed was very fast. Even if Lu Yi poured his spirit qi into his legs, he could only eat dust behind him. In a hurry, he could only shout, "Hoopa, don't be impulsive." He still didn't know what had happened to Yi, so it wasn't a good idea to rush over like this. De Hu slowed down a little. After Lu Yi caught up, he flipped over and De Hu sped up. After a short while, behind a huge rock, a ball of fire came into view. There were several cultivators gathered around a bonfire. It seemed that they were preparing to spend the night here. In front of the cultivators was something that looked like a big bell. Spirit light flowed on the big bell, and complex and mysterious patterns gathered to form a pattern that slowly rotated around the big bell. Inside the big bell, there was a faint sound of impact. Yi was trapped inside. Seeing this scene, Lu Yi knew what was going on. Yi was a spirit body, so ordinary methods couldn't trap her at all. That big bell was a spirit artifact. Fortunately, after Lu Ye's reminder, De Hu was able to suppress his bestial impulses and didn't immediately pounce. Lu Yi urged his spirit qi to gather in his eyes and looked at the spirit qi on the cultivators. For cultivators, 1 at the 2nd layer of the spirit stream realm, 2 at the 3rd layer, and 1 at the 4th layer. Chapter 63. Among the 4 cultivators, there were 3 men and 1 woman. The woman was a 2nd-order spirit stream realm cultivator. She was wearing light clothes and had an enchanting figure. She was snuggling up to another 3rd-order spirit stream realm cultivator, who was holding her in his arms. The two looked very intimate. The 3rd-order spirit stream realm cultivator was very handsome and wore luxurious clothes. He had a sword at his waist and a bulging storage bag hanging from his waist. He seemed to have an extraordinary status. The other 3rd-order spirit stream realm cultivator was a stocky man. His clothes were tight to his body, faintly revealing his well-defined muscles. At this moment, he was standing in front of the man and woman who were hugging each other like a guard. The 4th-order spirit stream realm cultivator was a man as thin as a bamboo pole. He was looking around vigilantly. The arrival of Lu Yi and De Hu did not alarm them. 1 man and 1 tiger were hiding about 10 feet away from them, looking through the gaps between the rocks. Lu Yi did not know how Yi was trapped by them, but the methods of cultivators were mysterious and unpredictable. There were always many things that Lu Yi did not understand. The most important thing right now was to rescue Yi. It had to be said that the 4th-order spirit stream realm cultivator gave him a lot of pressure, not to mention that there were 4 of them. "Young master, what is that?" A pleasant voice was heard. It was the woman who asked. Although the Xianling bell was triggered, they did not see how it was triggered. Only the owner of the Xianling bell could figure out what was going on. The handsome man who was hugging her formed a seal with 1 hand. After sensing it, he raised his eyebrows and said, "Interesting. Is it a spirit body?" The profound spirit bell was his spirit artifact. It was an extremely powerful and hidden protective spirit artifact. Spirit body. The woman shrank back and deliberately burrowed into the man's arms. Young master, I'm scared. The young master laughed and patted the woman's soft waist. Don't be scared. He signaled to the fourth order spirit stream realm cultivator and said, Senior brother Zhang, go and try. Senior brother Zhang nodded and said, yes. He walked towards the big bell on the ground. When he got close, he suddenly threw a punch. A loud bang was heard, followed by Yi's miserable shriek from within the bell. It was obvious that she had been injured. Roar. A tiger's roar resounded through the forest. A snow-white figure rushed out from its hiding place and pounced straight at senior brother Zhang. Big Tiger had been provoked. Although Lu Yi had told it not to be impulsive and it had listened, seeing that Yi was hurt, its bestial instincts eventually overcame its rationality. It had very little rationality to begin with. Not only were the four cultivators shocked, even Lu Yi was caught off guard. He was still thinking about how to save Yi, when the tiger pounced. A fishy smell filled the air. The woman cried out in fear. This time, she was really frightened. The stocky man immediately changed his position and stood in front of the young master and the woman. Senior brother Zhang, who had the highest cultivation base, was shocked. He formed a seal with one hand and lightning began to flicker on his fingertips. But in the next moment, his expression changed, because behind Big Tiger's vigorous figure, another figure actually dashed out. It was none other than Lu Yi. Big Tiger had rashly attacked, and he didn't have time to think of a countermeasure. He rushed out with Big Tiger, using the cover of Big Tiger's body to buy him some time. He pounced straight at the young master. Among the four, it was clear that the young master was the leader. As long as he could capture the young master, all of their problems would be solved. This was the only solution they had. Stop him. Senior brother Zhang shouted and raised his hand to strike Big Tiger. A bolt of lightning visible to the naked eye shot out from his palm and struck Big Tiger's body. Big Tiger roared in pain, its roar shaking the heavens as a wave of qi rushed forward. This tiger's roar caused senior brother Zhang's mind to go blank for a moment. His heart trembled. What a vicious beast. If this vicious beast were to mature, its strength would definitely far surpass that of other vicious beasts of the same level. He touched his storage pouch and two curved blades appeared in his hands. He held them upside down and charged at Big Tiger. On the other side, Lu Yi placed one hand on his saber and poured spiritual power into his legs. He rushed at the stocky man like a gust of wind. The other party let out a low roar as his spirit qi surged. The clothes that were originally clinging to his body burst apart and his sturdy figure seemed to swell up. He then touched his storage pouch and pulled out a 2-meter-long hammer which he held horizontally in front of him. Just by standing there, he gave off an impregnable feeling. It would not be easy to break through his blockade and capture the young master behind him. What's more, the young master was not an ordinary person. He was a third-order spirit stream realm cultivator and there was a second-order spirit stream realm woman beside him. The distance between the two sides quickly narrowed. Lu Yi placed his other hand on the hilt of his saber and made a gesture of drawing it, but when he raised his hand, there was no saber light. Instead, a burning fire snake appeared out of thin air and shot towards the stocky man. Fire snake talisman. The stocky man shouted, secretly cursing his enemy's cunning. He had obviously made a gesture of drawing his saber, but he had actually secretly shot out a spirit talisman, causing him to be overwhelmed. At this time, the best solution was naturally to avoid the attack of this spirit talisman. Although the power of this fire snake talisman was not small and its range was quite large, if he wanted to, he could still avoid it. However, he would definitely fall into a passive situation. However, the young master was right behind him, so how could he dare to avoid it? Gritting his teeth, he hurriedly took out a golden body talisman and slapped it onto his body while pushing his protective spirit qi to protect himself. There was a huge explosion of fire, and the flying fire snakes engulfed the sturdy man's figure. The next moment, he rushed out of the fire unscathed and rushed towards Lu Yi. He raised the sledgehammer in his hand and shouted angrily, "Do you think a mere talisman can hurt me?" Just as his arrogant words fell, a saber light flashed and the stocky man staggered back a step, reaching out to cover his throat and even dropping his weapon on the ground. Huff huff. He gasped for breath, but blood gushed out from his hands. He couldn't stop it no matter how hard he tried. He couldn't figure out why his well-tempered spirit chi couldn't even block a single slash from his opponent. The golden body talisman he slapped on his body was broken by the fire snake talisman, but he still had his protective spirit chi. Moreover, he walked the path of a body cultivator, which was why he had been standing in front of the young master. In the cultivation world, body cultivators were the most durable. Powerful body cultivators could even resist the spells of spell cultivators with their bodies. Although he was a small body cultivator and couldn't fully exert the advantages of a body cultivator, in any case, his defense shouldn't have been broken by a single slash. However, in fact, his throat was cut open by Lu Ye's saber. If his body wasn't strong enough, this slash would have cut off his entire head. The destructive power of a spirit weapon long saber enhanced by sharpness spirit inscriptions was beyond the imagination of this body cultivator. Lu Yi was also very surprised. He didn't want to kill his opponent with a single slash. He instinctively swung his saber just to force his opponent to retreat, but the result of this slash was unexpectedly powerful. Chapter 64. Lu Yi guessed that this was related to his recent increase in strength. The stronger he was, the more powerful his spirit inscriptions would be. In the end, spirit inscriptions were based on his spirit energy. Moreover, the long saber in his hand could barely be classified as a spirit artifact, unlike the common iron sword from before. The same spirit inscription on a spirit artifact and a common iron sword had different power. With a fire snake talisman and a sharp slash, Lu Yi, with his second-order spirit stream realm cultivation, was able to cut down a third-order body cultivator. His figure barely paused as he passed by the body cultivator and arrived in front of the brightly dressed young master. The young master was obviously scared silly, mainly because the series of unforeseen events happened too quickly. He was still thinking about studying the spiritual body trapped by the profound spirit bell when senior brother Zhang punched out. A big snow-white tiger rushed out, followed by a fierce cultivator. Before he could figure out the situation, the body cultivator in front of him clutched his neck and fell down. At the critical moment of life and death, the young master instinctively pushed the woman in his arms. Caught off guard, the woman was pushed towards Lu Ye's blade. The woman's expression was one of panic as she watched the saber flash before her eyes. She only had time to push her spirit energy to protect herself before her vision began to turn upside down and she quickly lost consciousness. Taking advantage of the short time the woman had bought, the young master hurriedly took out a spirit talisman from his storage bag, poured his spirit energy into it, and threw it out. Lu Ye's brutality had really frightened him. He rarely fought with people face to face. Usually, when he killed someone, it was his two senior brothers who captured them first or beat them half to death before letting him take action. He had never experienced such a dangerous and exciting scene. He even forgot to take back his profound spirit bell to protect himself for a moment. On the other hand, Lu Yi was extremely calm from beginning to end and had a clear goal. His second-order spirit stream realm cultivation allowed him to display the aura of a ninth-order master. Temperament was related to a person's past experience. The young master, who had lived a life of luxury since childhood, was naturally inferior to a miner who struggled to survive in the cracks. In the blink of an eye, a slash appeared in front of Lu Yi. He was not surprised by this. That stout man had a golden body talisman to protect himself, so this young master must have one as well. Lu Ye's spirit energy surged and roared as the two major circulatory cycles were pushed to the limit. Lu Ye's eyes were overflowing with spirit energy as he clearly saw where the slash was going to land. A triangular shield-like object with complicated patterns appeared on Lu Ye's chest. It was a defensive spirit rune. Almost as soon as the spirit pattern was formed, the spirit talisman's attack arrived. Lu Yi only felt a strong force smashing into his chest, causing his chest to feel stuffy and short of breath. He didn't know how much of an impact this strike would have on him, but he didn't have the time to pay attention to it. He had already arrived in front of the young master. Under the young master's bewildered gaze, he stabbed out with his saber. The young master hurriedly activated his protective spiritual energy as if it was made of paper. It was pierced through by the long blade. The sharp blade pierced through his shoulder blade and blood splashed out. A blood-curdling scream rang out. Lu Yi pulled out his saber, turned around, and arrived behind the young master, placing his saber across the young master's neck. The young master's scream came to an abrupt end. Feeling the cold touch on his neck, he froze in place. From the moment De Hu's whereabouts were exposed until now, only 5 breaths of time had passed. Lu Yi had broken through the stout body cultivator's blockade, killed the second-order woman, and captured the young master in front of him. During this time, he had activated 3 sharpness spirit runes and 1 defensive spirit rune. He didn't even have time to think during the entire process. Slashing out with his saber, killing the young master, all in a single breath. **Wu. As De Hu roared, his sturdy figure was sent flying, slamming into a nearby rock wall and sliding down. He wasn't the opponent of the 4th-order cultivator at all. In just a few moments, he was completely at a disadvantage. However, the victor didn't show the slightest joy. Turning his head to look at the messy battlefield, his eyes filled with disbelief, junior brother's son clutched his throat and fell to the ground, his eyes wide and his body twitching constantly. Although he hadn't died yet, his injuries were beyond saving. Junior Marshal Sister Yuan's headless corpse fell to the side. Blood gushed out from her neck, making a sizzling sound. Her charming head rolled to the side, and there was still a frightened expression on her face. Young master's shoulder was bleeding profusely. A long saber was placed on his neck. Behind the young master, a figure was hidden. Only one eye could be seen. It was staring at him like a lone wolf. It was fierce and decisive. What's going on? Senior brother Zhang's scalp went numb. He had only fought with the snow-white tiger for a moment, so how did his 3 fellow disciples end up with 2 dead, 1 injured, and even captured? Who is this? De Hu, who had been sent flying, got up and walked over step by step. However, he didn't rush to attack senior brother Zhang because he realized that he wasn't his opponent. Now that Lu Yi had captured one of the opponents, there was no need for him to be anxious. Release him. Lu Yi stared at senior brother Zhang and shouted. Who are you? Senior brother Zhang gritted his teeth and asked. In his mind, he could think of a worthy opponent, but none of them matched Lu Yi. Lu Yi withdrew his saber and stabbed it into the young master's thigh. A scream rang out as the young master almost fell to his knees. Lu Yi held him up to stabilize his body. Lu Yi pulled out his saber and blood spurted out. Lu Yi rested his saber on the young master's neck and looked at senior brother Zhang, repeating his words, release him. You. Senior brother Zhang's eyes almost popped out of their sockets. He had underestimated Lu Ye's decisiveness and fierceness. He had only spoken a few words and the young master had been stabbed again. The other party's meaning was obvious, if he dared to speak any more nonsense, he would be stabbed again. He didn't know where the next stab would land. With the young master restrained, senior brother Zhang didn't dare to rush forward even though he was a 4th-order cultivator. Right now, ensuring the young master's safety was more important, otherwise, he wouldn't be able to complete his task. With a gloomy face, senior brother Zhang said, this profound spirit bell is a spirit artifact bestowed by the sect's seniors. Once it's activated, it won't be easy to open, it will take some time. **Schwa, **, a saber light flashed and an arm flew off. The young master who was captured in front of Lu Yi was stunned for a moment before his body trembled violently. He screamed loudly but didn't dare to make any movements because the sharp weapon on his neck could cut his neck at any time. He roared, "Zhang Wu, are you trying to kill this young master? I'll fuck your whole family's ancestors. Release him." Lu Ye's voice was low. He had obviously lost his patience. "Release, release, release." The young master's face was covered in tears and snot. The pain was driving him crazy. The only reason he didn't faint was because he was a third-order cultivator. He barely managed to lift his remaining arm and formed a seal with his hand. The profound spirit bell that was upside down on the ground immediately flew up. The big bell spun and quickly shrank, flying back to the young master's hand. Lu Yi was stunned. Only now did he know that the spirit artifact was controlled by the young master, who had been trapped, broke free and rushed towards Big Tiger. She plunged into Big Tiger's body and disappeared. Although senior brother Zhang wanted to do something, he didn't dare to act rashly. He looked at Lu Yi who was hiding behind the young master and slowly said, "Release the young master and today's matter will be forgotten. I can make a heaven's secret oath." "Good." Lu Yi responded and reached out to push the young master. The young master staggered forward a few steps. Before he could feel the joy of surviving a disaster, a hot spring gushed out from his neck. "How dare you!" Senior brother Zhang roared. Chapter 65. This battle caught Lu Yi off guard. He didn't even know who his opponent was, but since he followed De Hu out, the outcome of this battle was destined. Either you die, or I die. There was no reason in the cultivation world. Cultivation realm was reason. He was only a second-order spirit stream realm cultivator, so he couldn't reason with others. He might even get himself killed. After he attacked, he killed 2 of his opponents in a row. It was a battle to the death. Although senior brother Zhang was willing to swear a heaven's secret oath that as long as Lu Yi released the young master, he would drop the matter, that was only his oath. It had to be known that the one Lu Yi had captured was the young master of a sect. How could such a character be willing to give up after suffering such a great loss? Even if Lu Yi forced him to swear a heavenly oath, he still had an entire sect behind him. Others wouldn't be bound by a heaven's secret oath. In the end, the most likely outcome was that Lu Yi would be hunted down by an entire sect. There was only one way to avoid such an outcome. Chase them all out. Of the 4 cultivators, 2 were dead and 1 was seriously injured. The young master's neck was cut open by a long blade and blood gushed out like a fountain. He raised his hand to cover his neck, but there was little effect. At the same time that senior brother Zhang roared, Lu Yi kicked the young master's back, sending him flying towards Zhang Wu. "Save me!" The young master bared his fangs and brandished his claws in the air. Looking at the young master rushing towards him, he could vaguely see Lu Yi hiding behind the young master and rushing towards him. Zhang Wu actually lost his sense of propriety. If he didn't catch the young master at this time, the young master would definitely fall to the ground. At that time, his injuries would become even more serious and he might not be able to be saved. Although the young master's neck was cut open, the person who attacked was quite restrained. If he rescued him in time, he might be able to save the young master. But if he caught the young master, he wouldn't be able to block the other party's attack. In that instant of hesitation, Zhang Wu felt the enemy's cunning. In the end, he didn't dare to let the young master fall. This time, he failed to protect the young master, so punishment was inevitable, but as long as he could save the young master's life, at least he wouldn't die. But if the young master died, then there was no way he could survive. Zhang Wu clasped the 2 curved blades in his hands and took 2 steps forward. He raised his hand to catch the young master flying towards him and at the same time, activated his protective spiritual energy. He had already clearly seen the other party's cultivation, it was only a second-order spirit stream realm cultivator. Yang Kai's fourth-order cultivation was much stronger than the other parties, so he was confident that even if the other party attacked, Yang Kai's protective spirit energy would be able to withstand a blow or two. Puchi, the sound of the long blade cutting into flesh was heard. The young master, who was caught by Zhang Wu, widened his eyes and opened his mouth wide. The intense pain made him scream again. Zhang Wu's pupils contracted to the extreme at this moment. He watched as a long saber pierced through the young master's chest and headed straight for him. He activated his protective spiritual energy with all his might. If he had seen how Lu Yi had broken through the body cultivator's defense, he would not have been so blindly confident. Unfortunately, he had been fighting with Big Tiger and had not seen how the body cultivator had died. The snow-white blade flashed with a light. With the support of the sharpness spirit inscription, the protective spiritual energy of a fourth-order spirit stream realm cultivator could not withstand this sharp blade. The protective spiritual energy only blocked the long saber's advance for a moment before it was pierced. Zhang Wu felt the pain in his chest. At this moment of life and death, he suddenly bent his body to prevent the long saber from piercing deeper into his body. At the same time, he let go of the young master in his arms and crossed his two curved blades to block the long saber. The saber had penetrated 3 inches into the young master's flesh and could not pierce any further. Zhang Wu let out a long breath. Just when he thought he had blocked the other party's attack, a strong wind suddenly rushed towards him from behind. Oh no! Zhang Wu immediately realized what had happened. Although the other party was only one person, there was still a big white tiger. The one rushing towards him from behind was undoubtedly that big white tiger. Just as he was about to respond, his shoulder suddenly sank, as if something heavy was pressing down on it. At the same time, a fierce roar sounded in his ears. The sound entered his ears and caused him to be slightly dazed. The young master, who was held in the middle by Lu Ye's long saber, was not dead yet. He faced Zhang Wu's direction and opened his mouth wide. He watched as the delicate porcelain doll-like spirit rushed behind Zhang Wu and shouted into his ears. Then, Big Tiger's sturdy body rushed over and its 2 front paws slammed into Zhang Wu's back. The overwhelming power caused Zhang Wu's bent body to straighten up and he took a few steps forward. With a chi-chi sound, the long saber pierced through his chest and came out of his body. With a successful strike, Lu Yi immediately pulled out his saber and jumped back. Not only him, Big Tiger, who had slapped him on the back, also nimbly retreated several meters. Almost at the same time as Big Tiger retreated, Zhang Wu stabbed the air with his saber. His body couldn't help but stagger back a few steps. His body went soft and he hurriedly used his curved saber to support himself, avoiding the fate of falling to the ground. Lu Yi looked at the wound on his chest and frowned. His saber was aimed at the other party's heart, but from the result, it didn't go as planned. The saber's position was off, and it didn't immediately take the other party's life. When Lu Yi pulled out his saber and Zhang Wu staggered back, the young master in the middle also fell to the ground. His blood dyed the ground red, and his body twitched a few times before it stopped moving. At this moment, Zhang Wu couldn't care less about the young master's life or death. He only knew that he was going to die here today. He was a fourth-order spirit stream realm cultivator, but in just a few breaths, he was beaten dizzy by a second-order spirit stream realm cultivator and Big Tiger. If he didn't experience this personally, no one would believe him. What grade of spirit artifact did the other party have? It was actually able to break through his body protecting spirit chi. Feeling his injuries, Zhang Wu knew that he couldn't be saved. Although he wouldn't die for the time being, if this injury wasn't treated immediately, it would only get worse. Looking at the other party's ruthless style, it was obvious that they wouldn't let him leave this place alive. Gasping for breath, he raised his hand and pressed it on the back of his other hand. The back of his hand immediately glowed with a faint red light. Lu Yi looked at him vigilantly. According to his thinking, Zhang Wu was already seriously injured, so there was no need for him to fight fiercely. He only needed to slowly deal with him, and sooner or later, he would be able to kill him. But when he saw the red light on the back of the other party's hand, he suddenly felt that something was wrong. Hu pa! Lu Yi shouted as he charged at Zhang Wu with his saber. Zhang Wu quickly got up. His body was unstable, and blood was flowing from his chest, but he still smiled fiercely. 9 Stars sect won't let you go. You're dead. Lu Yi chopped down with his saber, and Zhang Wu raised his saber to block the attack. However, Big Tiger took the opportunity to pounce from the side, and he couldn't guard against it. Big Tiger bit down hard on Zhang Wu's thigh, tearing off a large chunk of flesh. Yi also appeared and clung onto Zhang Wu's back, screaming and shrieking as she played her role as much as possible. Big Tiger, who had bitten off a chunk of flesh, was sent flying by Zhang Wu's kick, and Yi, who was clinging onto his back, was also sent flying by his body-protecting spirit chi. Zhang Wu's saber crossed, and Lu Yi was pushed to the side. Although he quickly stabilized himself, a flash of saber light appeared in his eyes. Chapter 66. Zhang Wu was a 4th-order spirit stream realm cultivator, so his combat experience was obviously much richer than Lu Ye's. With 2 swords in hand, he danced about in a daze. Lu Yi had just raised his saber to block his opponent's attack when the curved blade in his other hand stabbed towards him at an extremely fast speed. At this moment, it was obviously too late to block. Just when Zhang Wu thought he was about to succeed, a small triangular shield-like thing suddenly appeared around Lu Ye's body. With a ding, the curved blade stabbed into the defensive spirit rune, blocking this brutal blow. Lu Yi shifted his center of gravity and slid sideways, slashing his saber diagonally. The sharp blade left a long wound on Zhang Wu's arm, causing his flesh to bleed. De Hu also took advantage of the situation and pounced forward, his roar shaking the sky. Yi's figure was like a ghost, drifting from place to place, drawing Zhang Wu's attention. 3 against 1. A moment later, Lu Yi panted heavily, his saber once again piercing through Zhang Wu's chest, but this time, it pierced his heart. Zhang Wu's head drooped and he lost all signs of life, his hands hanging by his side as his weapon fell to the ground. This difficult battle finally ended with Lu Ye's victory. However, he had also paid a heavy price. Not only had he consumed more than half of his spirit chi, but there were also 4 bone-deep wounds on his body. Blood had almost completely dyed his clothes red, and a strong smell of blood filled the air. The defensive spirit rune could indeed block the opponent's attacks, but there were several times when Lu Yi didn't have time to activate it. The opponent's attacks were too fast, and this was a gap brought about by his cultivation and combat experience. Fortunately, the injuries he received were not fatal. As a 2nd-order spirit stream realm cultivator, he had fought a 4th-order spirit stream realm cultivator, and had even seriously injured his opponent. Even though he had a great advantage, he still had to pay such a huge price to take down his opponent. This made Lu Yi deeply realize his own shortcomings. Not only did he suffer heavy injuries, but De Hu and Yi were also not in good condition. Half of De Hu's body was blood red, and Yi's figure had become much dimmer. Hurriedly cleaning up the battlefield and collecting the storage bags of the dead, Lu Yi didn't even let go of the young master's profound spirit bell. He leapt onto De Hu's back and shouted, "Let's go." Big Tiger leaped out and rushed toward the sky-splitting gorge. Halfway through the journey, Lu Ye's vision began to blur and his body was about to collapse. He felt that he could not hold on any longer. He only had time to remind Yi and Big Tiger, if you encounter a fork in the road, don't wander around. Find a place to hide. We'll talk about other things when I wake up. Before Yi could react, Lu Ye's body tilted and almost fell off the tiger's back. She hurriedly went forward and supported Lu Yi. Less than half an hour after Big Tiger left with Lu Yi, a figure suddenly appeared on the battlefield. The person looked at the traces left behind on the battlefield and shouted, "Found it." In an instant, 2 more figures flew over from nearby. The 3 of them looked at the messy battlefield and knew that things were not good. "What should we do?" informed senior apprentice brother Chao Yi. Saying so, one of them sighed and activated his war brand to send out a message. After waiting for a moment, a burly figure descended, his body shrouded in a rich aura. Judging from his aura, it was even stronger than the fifth-order spirit stream realm cultivators Lu Yi had seen before. Senior apprentice brother Chao. The three of them saluted. Chao Yi stepped forward and checked the bodies of his 4 fellow disciples. His face gradually became gloomy. From the remnants of the battlefield, junior apprentice brother Sun's neck had been cut off and he bled to death in a short time. Junior apprentice sister Yuan had been decapitated. The young master had wounds on his thigh, shoulder, neck, and an arm. The fatal wound was on his chest. As for Zhang Wu, there were many wounds on his body. He had obviously experienced a great battle and the fatal wound was on his chest. Waste. Chao Yi gritted his teeth and cursed. He really couldn't figure out how the young master, who had the protection of the profound spirit bell, died. One had to know that although the profound spirit bell was only a low-grade spirit artifact, its defensive power was still very strong. When in danger, as long as the profound spirit bell was used, even if it was against a 7th-layer spirit stream realm cultivator, it would be able to resist for a while. Those below the 7th-layer spirit stream realm would not be able to break through the profound spirit bell's protection in a short time. And in the outermost ring of the battlefield, forget the 7th layer of the spirit stream realm, even the 6th layer of the spirit stream realm was rarely seen. Cultivators at the 6th or 7th layer of the spirit stream realm were like overlords in this place. Cultivators at this level of cultivation usually stayed in their own sect's encampment and would not go out easily. If it were not for Zhang Wu's message, he would not have come here. With the protection of the profound spirit bell and the 4th order Zhang Wu following him, he and Dong Shuyi were not worried about letting the young master wander outside. What's more, this location was still within the range of Jiu Xing sect's encampment. Unfortunately, the young master was killed in his own sect's territory. How could he explain this to the sect master? It could be said that the 9-star sect's face had been completely destroyed. Chao Yi could almost imagine how furious those old men in the sect would be when this news spread back to the sect. Send a message back. Seal off the surrounding 100 miles and search for a youth with a white tiger. His cultivation is around 3rd or 4th layer spirit stream realm and he uses a saber-type spirit artifact. Regardless of faction or origin, those who provide information will be rewarded with 30 spirit stones. Those who kill him will be rewarded with 500 spirit stones. Those who capture him will be rewarded with 1,000 spirit stones. Chao Ye's low voice rang out. The 3 cultivators' expressions brightened as they hurriedly accepted the order. Although Zhang Wu had only sent back a simple message before his death, that was the youth with the white tiger, 2nd layer spirit stream realm. However, Chao Yi had clearly discovered more things. Zhang Wu had fought a great battle with the murderer and was killed afterwards. So, Chao Yi deduced that the other party's cultivation was not just 2nd layer spirit stream realm. It was very likely that he was 3rd or 4th layer spirit stream realm. Otherwise, it would be impossible for him to kill Zhang Wu. As for the saber, it was even simpler. The wounds on the young master and Zhang Wu's bodies were very obvious. The other party might have a very good spirit artifact in his hands. Otherwise, it would be impossible for the weak to defeat the strong and kill Zhang Wu. While he was deep in thought, Chao Yi suddenly turned his head to look in a direction and shouted in a low voice, "Who's there?" As his voice fell, a handsome man in a green robe with an elegant demeanor walked out from the darkness. The man had a long sword at his waist. He had one hand on the hilt of the sword as he walked out casually like a king patrolling his own territory. The moment he saw this man, Chao Yi acted as if he was facing a great enemy. His spirit energy quickly circulated as he gritted his teeth and shouted in a low voice, "Wang Yang." He couldn't be blamed for being so nervous. Although he was a 6th layer spirit stream realm cultivator, the other party was a 7th layer spirit stream realm cultivator. Don't look at the difference of 1 layer spirit stream realm. In the spirit stream realm, the fourth layer and the seventh layer were a watershed. Crossing this layer would greatly increase one's strength. In their previous confrontations, Chao Yi had suffered many losses at the hands of the other party. So, when he saw this guy appear, Chao Yi had a headache. He was confident that he could escape. After all, he was a body cultivator. His skin was rough and his flesh was thick. Even if he couldn't defeat Wang Yang, he could still run for his life. However, the same couldn't be said for his 3 fellow disciples. Why didn't this dog stay in the profound sect's encampment? Why did he come out? Chao Yi cursed in his heart. He knew that the commotion here was too big and attracted the attention of the profound sect. Chapter 67. Jiuxing sect and Xian sect's encampments were next to each other, but they were in different camps, so naturally, there was friction between them. It could be said that over the years, their blood feud could not be resolved. Although the 9 Stars sect was an 8th rank sect, which was 1 rank higher than the Celestial Sect of Wonders, the Celestial Sect of Wonders had the upper hand in the Spirit Stream realm. Therefore, the 8th rank 9 Stars Sect of Wonders had suffered quite a bit in the hands of the 9th rank Celestial Sect of Wonders. Especially this Wang Yang, who was one of the most extreme weapon cultivators. His combat strength was unquestionable, and in the entire Jiuxing sect, only Dong Shai, who stayed behind to guard the encampment, could fight with him. Chao Yi admitted that he was not his opponent. Behind Wang Yang, there was a young girl with 2 buns. She had an exquisite figure and looked pure and cute. She followed behind Wang Yang like she was his maidservant. In fact, this was indeed the case. Wang Yang was born in a large mortal family, and the young girl was a maidservant who grew up with him. When Wang Yang joined Xian sect, he brought his own maidservant with him. Unexpectedly, both of them had good cultivation aptitude and talent. Now, they were both disciples of Xian sect. In name, they were brother and sister, but in reality, they were master and servant. The master and servant pair acted as if they did not see Chao Yi and the others and went straight to the battlefield. Wang Yang looked around and raised his brow, saying in surprise, "Who killed your young master?" He had been wondering why Jiuxing sect was so lively tonight, but it turned out that something so big had happened. He had only come out to investigate the situation after receiving the news. Otherwise, it would be impossible for a 7th order spirit stream realm cultivator like him to leave the sect's encampment at will. Chao Yi stared at him, not letting go of any expression on his face, but he did not see anything strange. "I told Dong Shai long ago to keep an eye on this piece of trash, but he refused to listen. Now, he's been hacked to death." Wang Yang had a gloating expression as he turned to Chao Yi. "Do you know who did it?" Chao Yi did not want to answer, but he had to, a young man with a white tiger. Wang Yang rubbed his chin, never heard of him. A rogue cultivator? Or a disciple from a big sect? After thinking about it, he shook his head. "Forget it, it's none of my business anyway." "Run!" Chao Yi suddenly shouted. At the same time, the ground under his feet exploded, and his figure fled into the distance. "Ha!" Wang Yang chuckled as he unsheathed the sword in his hand, sending a streak of sword light towards Chao Yi. At the same time, the young girl behind him with a harmless look on her face also surged with spiritual energy. She raised her hand and a spell was cast. Her slender fingers pointed at the 3 Jiuxing sect disciples. After a short moment, Wang Yang who'd pursued Chao Yi returned, and he still had a carefree expression on his face. "Young master, one ran away." The maidservant Xiaozhu walked up to report the results of the battle. In front of Wang Yang, she was an obedient and cute maidservant, but in front of the 9 Stars sect disciples, she was a powerful cultivator at the 6th order spirit stream realm. The average cultivation of the 3 9 Star sect disciples was at the 3rd or 4th order, so how could they be her opponent? However, the 3 of them were smart enough to split up and escape. Xiaozhu only managed to kill 2 of them, and by the time she chased after the last one, he had already disappeared. So be it. Wang Yang replied indifferently. Chao Yi had also run away, and he couldn't help but sigh. Body cultivators were really tough. Also, call me senior brother. Wang Yang raised his hand and knocked on Xiao Zhu's head. Xiao Zhu immediately covered her head with her hands and pouted. How many people do we have left? Wang Yang asked again. Less than 300. Xiao Zhu replied, but if we include the rogue cultivators, we have about 500 people. What about the fifth order? Only 6. TSK. Wang Yang curled his lips, a bunch of dogs, all of them running out to fish for benefits, leaving this young master here to guard the gate alone. Too much. The number of spirit stream realm cultivators in the profound sect was naturally far more than 300. However, these people couldn't all stay near the encampment, as that wouldn't benefit anyone. The cultivators would explore and travel, especially those cultivators above the fifth order. They basically wouldn't stay in the outer circle, because the benefits they could obtain in the outer circle were too few. After they reached the fifth order, they would choose to stay close to the inner circle. Correspondingly, the low-level disciples of the mid-level and large sects would also come to the profound sect's territory to gain experience. While they were under the protection of the profound sect, they would also be mobilized to a certain extent. It wasn't just the profound sect that was like this, as all the large sects in the outer circle were like this. In the spirit stream battlefield, the large and small sects were very close to each other, and their disciples frequently interacted with each other. However, it was also because of this reason that only 6 fifth-order cultivators could be dispatched from the profound sect. 2 of them had only recently broken through to the fifth order and hadn't had the time to leave yet. The remaining 4 were over 40 years old and didn't have much room for improvement in their cultivations. In the spirit stream realm, the age range of cultivators was very large. There were youths like Lu Yi, who hadn't cultivated for long, and old foxes who had cultivated for dozens of years. Without exception, all of them had very low innate talent, and their cultivations were all hard work over time. Young master wants to. Xiao Zhu looked at Wang Yang. Wang Yang grinned, send out the message, the hunt has begun. Make the little guys restless. Also, pay attention to that youth with the white tiger. If there's any news, report it immediately. Oh. In the 9 Stars sect's encampment, Dong Shai looked at the wounded Chao Yi and frowned, what happened? Chao Ye's mouth twitched, we met that crazy Wang Yang. Hearing Wang Yang's name, Dong Shai's face couldn't help but twitch. After a moment of silence, he said, in other words, the news has already spread? Chao Yi sighed, we caused such a big commotion, we can't hide it. Young master's death, do you think it has anything to do with the profound sect? Chao Yi recalled Wang Yang's expression and shook his head, it doesn't have much to do with it. Wang Yang sensed that there was movement here, so he ran out to investigate the situation. When he saw the young master's corpse, he was also surprised. Moreover, with his arrogance, if the young master was really killed by the profound sect, he wouldn't deny it. Instead, he would publicize it. Dong Shai nodded slightly, that's true. The blood feud between them couldn't be resolved. If the other party really killed the young master, there was nothing to hide. I've already sent out a message to seal off the surrounding 50 kilometers. The cultivation of the person who killed the young master shouldn't be high, so they won't be able to leave in a short time. As long as their whereabouts are exposed, they won't be able to escape. I'm just afraid that the profound sect will interfere. Dong Shai frowned. The profound sect will definitely make a move, but the young master's death must be explained to the old men in the sect. Otherwise, you and I won't be able to answer. Dong Shai sighed and said, I can't leave the encampment, so I'll leave the outside matters to you. Senior brother, don't worry. Chao Yi nodded. Although he was injured by Wang Yang, it was only flesh wounds. With the quality of his body, he would be more or less healed after a night of rest. Oh right, there's still the young master's corpse. Dong Shai thought of another matter. Chao Yi braced himself and said, I'll go and bring the young master's corpse back tomorrow. He prayed in his heart that Wang Yang wouldn't take the young master's corpse away. With that guy's character, he wouldn't do something so tasteless. Chapter 68. In the darkness, Lu Yi slowly woke up and immediately felt the pain of his wounds. Beside him, there was the sound of heavy breathing. It was Hu Pe. He opened his eyes and clearly saw his surroundings. In a dark and deep passageway, there was the sound of wind whimpering in his ears. This passageway wasn't sealed, but was open at both ends. Realizing this, Lu Yi immediately understood that he should still be in the heaven-splitting gorge. He didn't know how long he had been unconscious for, but it couldn't have been too long. Hu Pe didn't bring him through the heaven-splitting gorge, so it seemed that there was an accident. The map had indicated that the heaven-splitting gorge was an extremely complicated terrain. After entering the heaven-splitting gorge, it was only an ordinary gorge at first. The terrain on both sides was a little steep, but as they went further in, the gorge was separated by a lone mountain peak. One path became two, and as they went further in, 2 paths became 4 paths, 4 paths became 8 paths. In the end, there were dozens of paths in the heaven-splitting gorge, and these paths weren't completely isolated. The mountain peaks that separated them were filled with passageways that ran through both ends. Through these passageways, one could go back and forth between the paths. The constantly splitting paths and the countless passageways that connected these paths made the depths of the heaven-splitting gorge into an extremely huge natural maze. This was also the reason why Lu Yi chose to pass through the heaven-splitting gorge. With such a complicated terrain, unless one was a cultivator who spent a lot of time here, it would be very difficult to find the right direction. And he had the valuable map in his hands. With the map in hand, he didn't have to worry about getting lost. As long as he followed the directions on the map, he would be able to pass through the heaven-splitting gorge. He just didn't expect to encounter some sudden changes outside the heaven-splitting gorge, causing his current situation to be somewhat unfavorable. The passageway he was in now should be a passageway in one of the mountain peaks. In other words, he was in the maze inside the heaven-splitting gorge. Sitting up, Lu Yi was a little stunned. That was because his outer clothes had been taken off and torn into strips by someone to bandage his wounds. Judging from the clumsy technique, it should have been Yi's doing. Hu Pe clearly had the ability to do so. Lu Yi, you're awake. Yi floated over from the side and said in surprise. Hu Pe also raised his head and glanced at him. Lu Yi nodded, feeling the injuries on his body. Before he fell unconscious, he had taken 2 healing pills, and now his injuries were showing signs of improvement. However, if he wanted to fully recover, it would still take a few days. Although Zhang Wu had severely injured him, the most dangerous injury on his body was caused by the young master's spirit talisman slash. At that time, Lu Yi had activated the defensive spirit tattoo in time, but from the results, that slash had clearly broken through the defensive spirit tattoo and left an inch-deep wound on his chest. It had to be known that Zhang Wu's attack could not break through the defense of the Imperial Guard, but the talisman did. The talisman that the young master had used in a moment of crisis was obviously very powerful. If there was no Imperial Guard, that attack would have taken Lu Ye's life. After making sure that his injuries weren't too serious and that he was just a little weak, Lu Yi took out a set of clothes from his storage bag and put them on. He then took out a water bag and some food and tossed them to Big Tiger before eating as well. How long have I been asleep? Lu Yi asked as she ate. 1 day and 1 night. Yi sat cross-legged in front of him and replied in a low voice. What happened? There are a lot of people around and they should be looking for us. We almost exposed our whereabouts a few times and now we are lost. Lu Yi nodded, this was within his expectations. After he had used the young master to severely injure Zhang Wu, he originally did not plan to fight him head-on. With that kind of injury, as long as he delayed, Zhang Wu would become weaker and weaker. Waiting for Zhang Wu to be exhausted before finding a chance to kill him was undoubtedly a better strategy. However, when he saw the red light on the back of Zhang Wu's hand, he knew that his original plan would not work. The battlefield imprint on the back of a cultivator's hand not only recorded some information, it could also be used for communication. Zhang Wu was obviously calling for people at that time, so Lu Yi had no choice but to end the battle quickly. After killing Zhang Wu, he originally planned to pass through the heaven-splitting gorge as soon as possible. As long as he passed through the heaven-splitting gorge, he would be out of Zhouxing sect's sphere of influence. By then, Zhouxing sect would not be able to do anything to him. However, it seemed that Zhouxing sect's reaction was faster than he expected. A large number of cultivators had already entered the heaven-splitting gorge and were searching for him. After all, it was their young master who had been killed, so it was reasonable for Zhouxing sect to react fiercely. Right now, Lu Yi was safe, but his situation was definitely not good. He had to fight against an entire sect by himself, and even if that sect was only an 8th grade one, it was still not something Lu Yi could withstand. In the end, he was just a second-order Spirit Stream Realm cultivator who had only entered the Spirit Stream battlefield 3 months ago. As he ate, he fell into deep thought. Right now, relying on his own strength alone was not feasible. Near Zhouxing sect was Xian sect. These two forces belonged to different camps and were so close to each other, so there must be some grievances between them. Xian sect would not turn a blind eye to the commotion caused by Zhouxing sect. If he guessed correctly, Xian sect might make some moves. In that case, Xian sect might be able to help him share some of the pressure. However, he could not take the initiative to cooperate with Xian sect. Firstly, his identity as a disciple of Jade Blood sect could not be exposed. Secondly, he was just a second-order Spirit Stream Realm cultivator and did not have the qualifications to cooperate with them. Of course, this was the most ideal situation. Whether Xian sect would interfere or not, Lu Yi did not know. "I'm sorry." Yi suddenly apologized. She felt that Lu Yi seemed to be a little angry. Lu Yi looked up at her and mumbled, "Did you do something wrong?" Yi said, "I'll be more careful next time. I won't expose my whereabouts so easily." When she was trapped in the profound spirit bell, she only felt endless darkness enveloping her and could not see any light. It was only when she vaguely heard Lu Ye's voice that she calmed down. To be honest, she was really surprised that Lu Yi would save her. That was because there were 4 cultivators, and basically all of them had a higher cultivation than Lu Yi. In that case, even if Lu Yi abandoned her, she wouldn't blame him. After all, they were just partners, and they hadn't worked together for long. They hadn't established a deep friendship yet, so there was no need for Lu Yi to disregard his own safety for her. However, Lu Yi still went. She couldn't be blamed for this. When she was scouting her surroundings, she found the 4 Zhouxing sect cultivators. She wanted to sneak in to check out the situation, but who knew that they had set up a profound spirit bell in advance, trapping her inside. However, at the end of the day, this matter was because she was not careful enough. If she did not get too close, the profound spirit bell would not have been activated. In the end, Lu Yi was seriously injured and unconscious. Yi blamed herself even more. Swallowing the food in his mouth, Lu Yi looked at Yi and said, "I asked you to investigate the surroundings. It's not your fault that you were trapped. I should save you. I was injured because my cultivation was not good enough. You don't have to feel sorry for anyone." Yi looked at Lu Yi with a touched face. She felt that the person in front of her was the best person in the world. Unexpectedly, Lu Yi changed the topic. "However, if you can't teach Hoopa well, then I think it's better for us to part ways." "Hoopa? What's wrong with Hoopa?" Yi was confused. Chapter 69. Hoopa, who was eating at the side, shrunk his head back, and the sound of him swallowing his food became much quieter. When Yi saw him like this, she knew that he must have done something wrong. She pursed her lips and asked Lu Yi, "What did Hoopa do wrong?" Lu Yi turned his head and glared at Hoopa. He briefly explained how Hoopa had rushed out when he went to rescue her, then said, "Do you still remember the first of our 3 rules?" Yi obediently sat in front of him, her back ramrod straight. She immediately replied, "You're in charge of everything. If there's a difference of opinion, I have to listen to you. Your memory's not bad." Yi turned her head and shouted, "Hoopa!" Hoopa whimpered, and his sturdy body slowly moved in front of Yi. He raised his eyes and looked at her pitifully. Yi raised her hand and slapped Hoopa's head. "Lu Yi already told you not to be impulsive, why didn't you listen? You couldn't have rushed out at that time, you had to listen to the arrangements." She slapped him every time he said a word. Yi also knew that Hoopa's previous impulsiveness had caused some trouble. From the results, Lu Yi had killed those 4 cultivators and saved her, but if Hoopa had been more patient, the situation would have been better. Perhaps Lu Yi wouldn't have fainted because of this. She was able to escape this time all because of Lu Ye's prompt decision. Hoopa had rushed out at that time, and if he had hesitated in the slightest, he would have missed the opportunity. Yi remembered this kindness in her heart, and in order to teach Hoopa a lesson, she didn't hold back at all, slapping Hoopa's head until it rang loudly. "That's enough." Lu Yi interrupted her and looked at her seriously. "I don't want this kind of thing to happen again." They had just started working together, so everyone needed to get used to each other and have a period of adjustment. However, this kind of thing happened once was enough. If it happened again, Lu Yi couldn't guarantee that he could escape unscathed. He didn't want to be killed by his own people one day. "Got it." Yi nodded, then looked at Hoopa. "Do you remember?" Hoopa whimpered softly as a response. Yi then looked at Lu Yi and sincerely said, "Thank you." This word of thanks was not only for Hoopa, but also for herself. The reason she was able to escape was because Lu Yi had risked his life. Moreover, this matter was not over yet. They were currently trapped in the heaven-splitting gorge, and it was unknown whether they could escape or not. Lu Yi waved his hand and checked his condition. He didn't need to worry too much about his injuries, and would be fine after a few days of rest. His spiritual energy had been consumed in the previous battle and needed to be replenished. However, what surprised him was that the barrier of his 26th aperture showed signs of loosening. Previously, he had cultivated to the level of 25 acupoints and had not tried to open 26 acupoints. Now that he thought about it, it should be because of the fierce battle between him and Zhang Wu. The surging spiritual energy had impacted the spirit acupoint barrier. This was a good thing. It would save him some time to cultivate. But before that, he had to replenish his spiritual energy. In such a dangerous environment, it was important to be in a good state. Who knew when a fierce battle would break out, and Lu Yi would not have time to recover. However, he was not in a hurry to cultivate. Instead, he gave Yi a look. Yi understood and patted Hoopa's head. One spirit and one tiger immediately split up and went to the 2 sides of the corridor. This way, with the 2 of them monitoring the front and back of the corridor, Lu Yi would not be blocked in the corridor and would have room to retreat if he encountered danger. After Yi and Hoopa left, Lu Yi lowered his head and looked at the back of his hand. After urging his spiritual energy, the back of his hand was covered in a layer of blue light and turned into a few lines of words. Name, Lu Yi. Identity, Blue Blood Sect Disciple. Cultivation, 25 acupoints. Merit points, 34. Lu Yi looked at the row of merit points in amazement, unable to figure out where the number 34 came from. Last time, he had killed the fair-skinned man and Lu Ruyan in Blue Cloud Mountain and obtained 8 merit points. This time, after killing 4 people, his merit points had increased to 34. In other words, those 4 people had given him a total of 26 merit points. For the time being, Lu Yi did not know what merit points were used for. He had asked Yi, but Yi did not seem to know much about it. Her memory was very damaged. There were some things she knew, but there were others she did not understand. Merit points were definitely useful, but as for how to use them and where to use them, he would have to slowly explore them. If he couldn't figure it out, then he was too lazy to think about it. Lu Yi threw a spirit accumulation pill into his mouth and refined it to replenish his spiritual energy. His spiritual energy slowly recovered. Lu Yi had previously discovered that the efficiency of recovery and cultivation, as well as the consumption of spirit pills, were very different. Pure recovery was much faster than cultivation, and the consumption was also much lower. The most direct comparison was that Lu Yi had now opened 25 acupoints. During this time, he had consumed nearly 200 spirit pills and had spent nearly 3 months. But if he exhausted his spiritual energy in battle and wanted to replenish it, it would be impossible for him to consume 200 spirit pills, nor would it take him 3 months. If that was really the case, then the price a cultivator would have to pay in battle would be too great. During cultivation, the consumption of spirit pills would be great. Furthermore, tempering one's spirit acupoints required a great deal of effort. From opening a spirit acupoint to filling it was a gradual process. But once a spirit pill was filled, it would be much easier to recover. Time passed, and spirit pills were consumed one after another. 2 days later, Lu Yi had completely recovered, but there were only 20 or so spirit pills left in his possession. There was no movement from Yi and Hu Po's side. It seemed that their location was still safe for the time being. Lu Yi was not in a hurry to leave. He was not clear about the situation outside. Rashly leaving would only make the situation more troublesome. He was now only 2 acupoints away from the third-order spirit stream realm. Among them, the barrier of the 26 acupoints was still loosening. He had enough spirit pills, so Lu Yi decided to raise his cultivation first. At the second order, he could cooperate with Hu Po and Yi to kill Zhang Wu. If he reached the third order, his strength would increase, which would be of great help to his current situation. Moreover, his injuries had not healed yet, so he could take advantage of these few days to recuperate. After making up his mind, Lu Yi continued to swallow spirit pills and urged his spiritual energy to attack the barrier of the 26 acupoints. 5 days later, Lu Yi sat cross-legged with a solemn expression on his face in the tunnel of the mountain. The day before yesterday, he had already opened his 27 acupoints. After spending some spirit pills to fill them, it was time for him to break through to the third-order spirit stream realm. With the previous 2 experiences, Lu Yi was familiar with the process this time. Starting from the 19th acupoint, his spiritual energy followed the path of the 20th acupoint, 21 acupoints, and finally 27 acupoints. His spiritual energy circulated endlessly in the 9 spirit acupoints, constantly repeating itself, faster and faster. Until a certain moment, he broke through a bottleneck. Sitting cross-legged, Lu Yi's body shook as his spiritual energy surged. Chapter 70. At the spirit stream realm, every time one broke through to the next realm, there would be an additional minor circulation system in their body. Lu Yi was now at the third-order spirit stream realm, with 27 apertures open, and 9 of them circulating. There were 3 minor circulation systems in his body, in which his spirit chi flowed like a stream. What surprised Lu Yi was that after reaching the third-order spirit stream realm, he clearly felt that these 3 spirit chi circulation systems were resonating. This had not happened when he reached the first or second order. This resonance caused the spiritual energy in his body to flow faster. Now, he could be considered to have cultivated the golden cicada carefree technique that he had obtained from Steward Yang to perfection. If he were to connect the 27 opened acupoints in his body in a certain order, the pattern formed would be like a toad lying on the ground. This was probably how the name Golden Cicada Free Art came about. Every circulation of spirit chi was like the breathing of this toad. The 3 spirit chi circulation systems seemed independent, but in fact, they could affect each other. Logically speaking, after increasing one's cultivation by 1 realm, Lu Yi's strength should have increased by more than 30%, but he felt that his strength had actually increased by more than half. He quickly understood that this was the benefit brought about by cultivating a complete set of secret arts to the peak stage. At that time, when he fought Zhang Wu, if he had his current cultivation, Lu Yi would not have had to pay such a high price and might have been able to take him down without suffering any injuries. In terms of attack power, he had the Sharpness Spirit Rune. When he was at the second-order Spirit Stream realm, even a fourth-order like Zhang Wu couldn't stop him. In terms of defense, he had the Defensive Spirit Rune, which Zhang Wu couldn't break. His attack and defense were both beyond his current level. What he lacked was nothing more than experience and skills in fighting with others. However, experience could only be accumulated slowly through personal combat. As for his technique, along the way, he had spent at least 4 hours practicing the saber every day. The time was still short. Now, he did not dare to say that his saber skills were superb, but at least his grip on the saber was steadier than before, and he could draw his saber faster. In any case, he had killed a few people and slowly became familiar with the feeling of the saber in his hand cutting through the enemy's body, protecting spirit chi and cutting into the enemy's flesh. This feeling had become an instinct, and naturally evolved into a superb skill. There was no way to continue cultivating. He only had a few spirit pills left, and there was no suitable secret art for him to use. With his injuries fully healed, Lu Yi pondered for a moment before standing up. A moment later, he gathered Yi and Big Tiger and walked out of the tunnel where he had been hiding for several days. According to Yi's feedback, the Celestial Sect of Wonders and the Joshing Sect had been fighting fiercely in the Heaven-Splitting Gorge for the past few days. From time to time, small-scale battles would break out, and both sides would suffer losses. Lu Yi silently gave the Xian sect a thumbs up. This was exactly what he wanted to see, and it was also the reason why he could hide for so long. Previously, he felt that the Xian sect and the Joshing sect could not coexist peacefully. If the Joshing sect made any big moves, the Xian sect would definitely respond. But now, it seemed like he had underestimated the blood feud between the two sections. Lu Yi had killed 4 disciples led by the young master of the 9 Stars sect, which led to the 9 Stars sect searching for Lu Ye's whereabouts on a large scale. However, while Lu Yi, the main culprit, was recovering from his injuries, the matter had escalated into a chaotic battle between the Spirit Stream stage cultivators of the 2 great sections. He had originally planned to stir up trouble, but now, it seemed that there was no need to go through so much trouble. The situation was in his favor, but it was unrealistic for Lu Yi to just walk away. He did not know how many people the 2 sects had invested in the Heaven-Splitting Gorge. Now that he was trapped, if he wanted to escape, he would have to borrow the strength of the Xian sect. With a plan in mind, Lu Yi had Yi open up a path in front of him and investigate the situation, while he and De Hu stealthily moved 300 meters away from Yi. In a 10-meter-wide gorge, 7 cultivators were engaged in a chaotic battle. One side had 3 people, while the other had 4. Looking at the situation, it was clear that the side with fewer people had the advantage. The main reason was that the average cultivation of the 3 people was higher. Among the 3, one was at the 4th layer of the Spirit Stream stage, while the other 2 were at the 3rd layer. On the other hand, among the 4 people, 2 were at the 3rd layer of the Spirit Stream stage, while the other 2 were at the 2nd layer. One of them was at the 3rd layer of the Spirit Stream stage, and his arm was still dripping with blood. It was obvious that he had been injured. The battle between low-level cultivators was basically a close-quarters fight. It was rare for them to use their secret techniques. Because their cultivation was not high, the power of their secret techniques was not strong. Moreover, it took time to activate a secret technique, and it was easy to be disturbed. Even if the secret technique was successfully cast, accuracy would be a problem. In such a battle, the side with higher cultivation and stronger weapons would naturally have the advantage. Among the group of 4, the leader was a burly man. He held a large saber in his hand and stood in front of the others. As he retreated, he shouted, "You guys go." It seemed that he wanted to stay behind to cover the retreat. The other 3 people had sorrowful looks on their faces, but they did not abandon him and escape. Instead, they fought side by side with the burly man. But this was just drinking poison to quench their thirst. Once the burly man fell, all four of them would die here. The fourth layer of the opposing side obviously knew this, so even if he had the chance to kill the burly man, he did not do so. Instead, he kept cutting wounds on the burly man's body, making him look even more miserable. Not far behind the four people, Lu Yi and De Hu hid in a pile of rocks and looked over through the gaps in the rocks. He was originally having a headache about how to distinguish between the cultivators of Xian's sect and Jiu Xing's sect. After all, he could not just go up and ask for their identities. But after seeing the battle between the two sides, he knew that he was overthinking. It was easy to distinguish between the cultivators of Xian's sect and Jiu Xing's sect because the back of their hands were glowing with different colors. Lu Yi was very surprised, not knowing why this was happening. When he fought with others before, his battlefield imprint did not show any signs of activity. But he did not know that this was all Wang Yang's doing. Xian's sect and Jiu Xing's sect had been fighting for this territory for many years. But because Xian's sect had more Spirit Stream Realm cultivators and had always had the advantage, the Spirit Stream Realm cultivators of Jiu Xing's sect kept a low profile in this area. In the past, it was very difficult for Xian's sect to hunt down their opponents. This time, the young master of Jiu Xing's sect was killed, and almost all of the Spirit Stream Realm cultivators in the sect came out. This was an opportunity for Xian's sect. An opportunity to kill Jiu Xing's sect's disciples. So Wang Yang did not care about the cause of this matter. He only saw a good opportunity to deal a heavy blow to Jiu Xing's sect. Because of this, he did not hesitate to pay a price and borrowed the Tianji pillar to declare war on Jiu Xing's sect. Jiu Xing's sect had the right to refuse such a declaration of war. But this time, they wanted to hunt down the vicious person who killed their young master. How could they refuse? Dong Shai could only brace himself and accept it. At the same time, he cursed Wang Yang's 18 generations of ancestors in his heart. During such a declaration of war, when the cultivators of both sides fought, the back of their hands would glow with different colors, making their positions clear. One had to know that there were many loose cultivators on both sides. The faces of these loose cultivators were extremely unfamiliar to the cultivators of both sections. With the battlefield imprint, they could avoid accidental injuries and quickly determine who was the enemy and who was the trustworthy companion.